Long before the world knew his name, Hamdi Ulukaya was just a boy. Born in a remote Kurdish village in the rugged mountains of Turkey, life there was simple, but far from easy. His family lived as shepherds, rising with the first light of dawn. To care for their flock of sheep, every day began with the sound of bells hanging from the animals, echoing across the hills. Hamdi's father taught him that hard work was not a choice, but a way of survival. His hands were rough, his back bent from years of labor, yet he carried himself with pride. His mother, on the other hand, brought warmth into their modest home. She prepared bread, cheese, and the yogurt that would one day shape Hamdi's destiny. There was little money in the house. Electricity was rare, and on many nights, Hamdi studied by the faint light of a candle. The children wore clothes patched and repatched, passed down from one sibling to another. Yet despite the poverty, there was no shortage of love. Round the family fire, they shared not only meals but stories, laughter, and hope. From an early age, Hamdi felt the weight of responsibility. He herded sheep across the hillsides, sometimes in freezing winds, sometimes under the burning sun. While his friends often left school to help their families, Hamdi held on to education, believing it might open doors beyond the mountains. The culture of his people was rich in tradition. Weddings filled the air with drums and flutes. Guests were welcomed as family, for in Kurdish culture, hospitality was sacred, and food was more than nourishment. It was a symbol of connection and honor. Among all the foods his mother prepared, yogurt stood apart. Thick, creamy, and full of life, it was the taste of home, a taste he would never forget. Though life was harsh, Hamdi carried within him a restless curiosity. He would look beyond the hills and wonder what lay on the other side. Sometimes, while watching the sheep graze, he dreamed of faraway lands, of learning new languages, of building a future no one around him could imagine. In the silence of those vast mountains, a dream began to grow, a dream invisible to others, but powerful enough to guide him through every challenge ahead. Hamdi did not yet know how, or when, or where, but deep inside, he believed that one day he would carry the spirit of his homeland and the taste of his mother's yogurt to the rest of the world. Long before yogurt became a global product in the villages of eastern Turkey, it was a way of life. For Hamdi Ulukaya and his family, yogurt was not just food. It was tradition. It was memory. It was survival. In his small Kurdish village, every family knew the art of making yogurt. The process was passed down from mother to daughter, generation after generation. Sheep and goats provided the milk, warm and fresh. Carried in buckets at dawn, the milk was boiled slowly, stirred with patience, then left to rest in clay pots wrapped in thick blankets. Hours later, it transformed into a creamy, rich yogurt, a gift of both nature and care. This was more than a recipe, it was a ritual. In those clay pots, families preserved not only their food, but their identity. Yogurt was served at every meal, with bread, with honey, with herbs from the hillsides. In times of plenty, it was a celebration. In times of hunger, it was a lifeline. For the Kurdish people, yogurt was also a symbol of health. It was believed to strengthen the body and cleanse the spirit. Mothers fed it to their children first, before bread, before meat, believing it carried the strength of the flock and the purity of the land. Hamdi grew up watching his mother skillfully prepare it, her hands steady, her knowledge precise. He remembered the smell of the milk as it warmed, the quiet patience while it set, and the joy of tasting it fresh each morning. That taste was not just nourishment, it was home itself. When neighbors gathered for celebrations, yogurt was always present. Bowls of it sat at the center of the table, shared by everyone. Guests dipped bread into its cool creaminess while elders told stories of their ancestors. In that village, yogurt was more than food. It was the thread that tied families together. Even the word itself carried weight. In Turkish, yogurt meant something thick, something transformed. It was a symbol of change, of turning the simple into the extraordinary. And for Hamdi, it would one day become the foundation of his destiny. As a boy, he could never have imagined that this humble food, born in clay pots on the hillsides of his village, would one day conquer supermarket shelves in a faraway land. But the taste was unforgettable. a taste of authenticity, a taste that would later remind millions of people what really Gert was meant to be. Education was never easy. For Hamdi Ulukaya, in his small Kurdish village, classrooms were little more than bare rooms, with wooden benches and a chalkboard that had long since lost its shine. The journey to school was itself a challenge. Many mornings, Hamdi would walk for miles through rocky paths, sometimes in rain, sometimes in biting cold, carrying nothing but a worn notebook and a pencil that grew shorter each day. By the time he arrived, his clothes were often damp, his shoes covered in mud, but his determination remained unshaken. Inside the classroom, the challenges continued. Resources were scarce. Textbooks were old and shared between students. Teachers, often underpaid and overwhelmed, came and went, leaving little continuity. For many of Hamdi's friends, education was not a priority. They left school early to help their families with farming or herding, believing that survival mattered more than learning. But Hamdi was different. Even in the face of hardship, he hungered for knowledge. He knew that education might be the only path beyond the mountains, the only way to see a world he could only dream about. Yet his path was far from smooth. In a system that offered little support for children from poor Kurdish families, he often felt invisible. There were days when he struggled to understand the lessons, when the weight of exhaustion from herding sheep in the morning made it hard to keep his eyes open. There were moments of humiliation when he was scolded for mistakes in front of the class. At night, he studied by the dim glow of a candle. The house had no reliable electricity, so his mother would carefully place a candle on the table while Hamdi leaned over his notebook, straining his eyes to read and write. His siblings often laughed, telling him he worked too hard for something that would never matter. But Hamdi believed otherwise. He remembered one winter in particular, when the snow piled high outside and the cold cut through the walls of their modest home. While many children abandoned school during those harsh months, Hamdi pressed on, tracing words in his notebook with frozen fingers. He told himself, if I can endure this, maybe one day I'll endure the world. Education was not just about learning facts for him. It was about proving to himself that he could rise above the limits placed on his life. Every word he wrote, every lesson he absorbed, was a step closer to a dream that no one else could see. Though he struggled, though the system often seemed stacked against him, Hamdi carried within him a quiet fire, a fire that whispered, "You were meant for more." And so, in the dim light of candles, in the silence of nights broken only by the crackle of the fire and the soft breath of his sleeping family, Hamdi built the foundation of the man he would become. As the cold winds swept across the hills of eastern Turkey, a young boy often stood alone, watching the horizon. His name was Hamdi Ulukaya. In the silence of his forgotten village, a question began to grow inside him. Could a boy from here, from this place no one in the world had ever heard of, truly change anything? The village had no wealth, no factories, no shining schools, just sheep grazing in the fields, families struggling to make it through another winter, and children whose futures seemed already written. Most would follow the same path as their parents, herding, farming, surviving. Few dared to dream beyond the mountains. Hamdi knew this truth well. Every step he took through the dusty paths reminded him of the limits placed upon him. The limits of poverty, the limits of circumstance, the limits of being born in a land the world had chosen to ignore. And yet, within him, there was a whisper, a stubborn, unshakable voice that told him, "You are not defined by this village. You are not defined by what you lack. You are defined by what you dare to believe." He would ask himself again and again, could I, a shepherd's son, ever rise above this? Could I, a boy with patched clothes and calloused hands, ever make a difference? Could someone like me ever change the world? Each night, as the candle flickered over his worn notebook, he felt the weight of both doubt and possibility. The world outside those mountains was vast, terrifying, and unknown. But he also knew that staying meant a life where his dreams would wither. So the question became more than curiosity. It became a challenge, a silent vow to himself, if the world will not come to me, then I will go to the world. Hamdi did not yet know how or when or where, but deep down, he believed And that belief, fragile as it was, became the seed of his destiny. Because sometimes, the greatest revolutions begin not in cities of power, not in halls of wealth, but in the quiet heart of a forgotten boy who refuses to accept that the world cannot be changed. And Hamdi Ulukaya was that boy. The year was 1994. Hamdi Ulukaya was 22 years old, standing at the crossroads of his life. In his village, the mountains stood tall as always, silent, witnesses to generations of struggle. But for Hamdi, the silence had grown heavy. He had tried to study, he had worked. With his family, he had followed the path expected of him, and yet, something inside him whispered that his destiny lay beyond those mountains, beyond Turkey, beyond everything he had ever known. Life at home was becoming harder. Political tensions, limited opportunities, and the suffocating weight of poverty left little room for dreams. Hamdi knew that if he stayed, his life would likely follow the same script as countless others before him. Working the land, raising sheep, surviving one season at a time. But Hamdi wanted more than survival. He wanted possibility. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, he sat quietly with his mother. She served him a bowl of fresh yogurt, the taste of home. He hesitated, then finally spoke the words he had carried in his heart for so long. "I want to leave, for America." His mother's eyes filled with tears. America, a place so far away it felt like another world. She knew the dangers, she knew the pain of separation, but she also knew her son's spirit. Hamdi was not meant to live in silence. He was meant to chase something bigger. The village elders warned him, "You will be a stranger there. You don't know the language, you don't know the customs. You will suffer." But Hamdi had already made up his mind. The fear of the unknown was less than the fear of regret. He sold what little he had, packed a few clothes, and carried with him not wealth, but hope, and the memory of his homeland's taste. In his pocket, a few dollars. In his heart, a fire that no one could extinguish. As he boarded the plane, he looked out the window one last time. The mountains, the fields, the sheep, everything he had ever known, grew smaller and smaller until it vanished into the clouds. And he thought to himself, "I don't know what waits for me, but I know this, I cannot turn back." The plane carried him across oceans, into a land where he would be a stranger, where every word, every street, every rule was new. In 1994, a young man with nothing left everything behind. And in doing so, he began a journey that would one day change not only his life, but the lives of millions. Because sometimes, to find who you are, you must first leave everything you know. And that is what Hamdi Ulukaya did. The night before his departure, the air in the village was heavy. Everyone knew that tomorrow would change everything. Hamdi sat quietly with his family, the glow of a single lamp casting soft shadows on the walls of their modest home. His father, a man of few words, sharpened a small knife by the fire, not for use, but for the comfort of routine. His mother kneaded dough slowly, her hands trembling more than usual. The room was filled with silence, the kind of silence that speaks louder than words. Hamdi looked around, memorizing every detail. The worn carpet beneath his feet, the clay jars lined against the wall, the smell of warm bread mixed with the faint scent of sheep's wool carried from the day's work. He knew he might never see this again. When the meal was ready, the family gathered. No one mentioned the journey. No one dared to say goodbye. Instead, they ate in silence, each bite a reminder of what they were about to lose. After dinner, his younger siblings clung to him, asking innocent questions. "Will you bring us gifts from America? How far is it?" He smiled, hiding the storm in his heart. "Yes, I'll bring you gifts and stories." Later, his mother sat beside him, placing a small cloth bundle in his hands. Inside was homemade yogurt cheese, wrapped carefully. "You'll carry the taste of home with you," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes, "so you never forget who you are." Hamdi's father finally broke the silence. He placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder. "Life will test you," he said, "but remember, our blood runs in your veins. Wherever you go, you carry us with you." The weight of those words sank deep into Hamdi's soul. He realized this was not just his journey, it was theirs too. He was leaving not only for himself, but for every sacrifice his family had ever made. That night, Handy could not sleep. He stepped outside and looked at the stars, the same stars his ancestors had watched for centuries. He whispered to the dark sky, "Give me the strength to make this worth it." At dawn, the family walked with him to the edge of the village. His mother's eyes never left his face, as if trying to memorize every feature before he vanished into the horizon. His father embraced him tightly, longer than ever before, though his face showed no tears. Finally, as the bus approached, his mother's voice cracked, "Go, my son, make us proud, and don't forget us." Handy climbed aboard, his heart pounding. As the bus pulled away, he looked back through the dusty window. His family grew smaller, their figures blurred by his own tears. He knew this was not just a farewell. It was the closing of one life and the uncertain beginning of another. And though the bus carried him farther from the village, he felt something powerful inside, a promise: "I will return." Not the same boy who leaves today, but the man who will prove that this goodbye was not in vain. The plane landed with a thud. Hamdi Ulukaya stepped onto American soil for the first time. 1994, New York City. A world unlike anything he had ever seen. Everything moved faster. The buildings were taller than mountains. The streets buzzed with people, cars, lights, and noise. For a boy raised in the silence of sheep-covered hills, it felt like entering another planet. He was not prepared, not for the language, not for the chaos, not for the loneliness. The signs meant nothing to him. The words spoken around him blended into a blur of unfamiliar sounds. Ordering food was a challenge. Understanding directions was near impossible. Even the most basic task, asking for help, felt like a mountain too high to climb. He had studied a few phrases back home. "Hello, my name is Handy. Thank you." But in the real world, those words evaporated the moment he opened his mouth. Strangers smiled, but conversations ended quickly. Some were kind, others impatient. Most simply walked away. For the first time, Hamdi felt invisible, not because he was poor, but because he couldn't speak. He took on whatever work he could find, washing dishes, lifting boxes, cleaning up after people who didn't even notice him. The hours were long, the pay was little, and the isolation was suffocating. At night, he returned to a tiny room he shared with other immigrants, a thin mattress, a single light, a small window that faced a wall. No family, no friends, no sounds from the mountains to comfort him, just sirens and silence. He began to doubt himself. What am I doing here? Was this a mistake? The dream he carried now seemed foolish, a fantasy built on naivety. And yet, he refused to give up. He spent hours in libraries, reading children's books to learn English. He wrote down new words he overheard on buses or in the street. He practiced conversations in the mirror every day. He forced himself to speak, even if it meant being laughed at. And slowly, painfully, word by word, the wall between him and the world began to crack. One day, he understood a joke. Another day, he told one. Then came the first time he understood someone without needing them to repeat. These were small victories, but for Hamdi, they were monumental, because in those first months, he wasn't just learning a new language. He was learning how to survive, how to fight for himself, how to stay standing when everything around him tried to knock him down. He missed his family. He missed the yogurt. He missed the mountains, the stars, the silence. But he also knew going back would mean giving up. And Hamdi Ulukaya was not the kind of man who gave up. So he kept working, kept learning, kept believing that this strange land one day would become his home. And little by little, it did. In New York, dreams were expensive, and Hamdi Ulukaya had little more than hope in his pocket to survive. He took whatever work came his way. The first job was in a small restaurant, hidden on a busy street. The kitchen was hot, crowded, and loud. Hamdi washed dishes until his fingers were raw, the steam burning his face, the endless stacks of plates never seeming to end. He didn't complain. He couldn't afford to. For each hour, he earned just enough to buy food and pay for a bed in a crowded apartment. He moved from one job to another, wherever he was needed, carrying crates in warehouses, sweeping floors. After closing hours, waiting tables in places where he understood only fragments of the orders customers gave. Every mistake felt like a punishment. Every day was a battle against exhaustion and doubt. Then came the farms. Early mornings, long days under the sun, bending over fields that seemed to stretch forever. He picked vegetables, carried heavy sacks, and milked cows in barns that smelled of earth and sweat. The work was relentless, the pay small, but Handy did it with quiet determination, because deep down, he remembered his father's lessons back in Turkey. Work is dignity. No matter how hard, no matter how small, do it with pride. The other workers were often immigrants like him. They shared stories in broken English, laughing about their struggles, crying about the families they left behind. In those moments, Handy realized he was not alone. They were all fighting the same battle, to survive in a country that promised opportunity, but demanded sacrifice. At night, his body ached, his hands were blistered. But instead of collapsing into despair, Handy carried a secret flame. While others cursed their fate, he thought of the future. He thought of the yogurt his mother used to make. He thought of the possibility that one day he could bring that taste to this new land. These jobs, the restaurants, the farms, the warehouses, were not just work. They were training in endurance, training in humility, training in what it meant to start with nothing and keep moving forward. Each paycheck, no matter how small, was proof that he was still standing, proof that the boy from a forgotten village could survive in the world's toughest city. Handy never let the hardship define him. Instead, he let it shape him. Each blister, each tired night, was a step toward a destiny he could not yet see, but believed in with all his heart, because he knew these struggles were not the end of his story. They were only the beginning. In the land of opportunity, Handy Ulukaya discovered a truth that few outsiders understood. America was not just about dreams. It was about sacrifice, and often the price was everything. From the moment he arrived in New York, he could see it in the faces of the people rushing through the streets. Eyes focused, voices sharp, steps hurried. Everyone seemed to be chasing something, a job, a dollar, a future, and no one dared to stop. The phrase he heard again and again was simple, almost sacred: success at any cost. For many Americans, it was a badge of honor. Work longer, push harder, sacrifice sleep, family, even health, all for the promise of a better tomorrow. In this culture, rest was weakness. Doubt was failure. Only those willing to give everything could rise. Handy felt the weight of this belief everywhere he went. In restaurants, managers demanded more hours for the same pay. On farms, workers labored until their hands bled, just to keep their place. In warehouses, men collapsed from exhaustion, only to be replaced without hesitation. To Handy, it was a shock. Back in his village, work was survival, yes, but it was also tied to family, tradition, and dignity. In America, it seemed stripped of humanity, measured only in dollars and hours, and yet, beneath the harshness, there was something undeniable: opportunity. Those who endured could rise. Those who gave everything could change their fate. Handy watched other immigrants chase this vision with desperation. Some succeeded. Many broke under the pressure. But he realized something powerful. The system would never slow down for him. If he wanted a future here, he would have to run with it. So he did. He worked double shifts. He studied English late into the night. He saved every dollar, often skipping meals so he could put a little aside. He sacrificed comfort, rest, and sometimes even hope. And yet, unlike many around him, Handy carried a secret weapon: purpose. For him, success at any cost was not about wealth alone. It was about proving that a boy from a forgotten village could stand tall in the world's toughest country. It was about creating something bigger than himself. The American dream was harsh, unforgiving, and demanding. But Handy embraced it, not because he loved the cost, but because he believed the reward, a chance to build something meaningful, was worth every sacrifice. Because in America, he learned, dreams were not given, they were earned, one painful step at a time, and Handy Ulukaya was ready to pay the price. One afternoon, after a long shift cleaning in the back of a restaurant, Handy stopped at a grocery store. He walked past aisles filled with brightly colored packages, unfamiliar brands, and endless choices. It was overwhelming. But then, he saw something familiar. A plastic cup. The label said yogurt. He smiled, remembering the clay pots. Back home, the taste of his mother's recipe, the cool, thick texture, the comfort of home. He bought it, sat on a bench outside, peeled the lid back, took one bite, and paused. This wasn't yogurt. It was sweet, thin, artificial, nothing like what he knew, nothing like what had nourished his family for generations. Handy took another bite, slower this time, still wrong, still empty, still fake. He looked around. People walked by eating it casually, as if this was normal, as if they had never tasted anything better. And most hadn't. That was the moment it hit him hard. They don't know. They've never had the real thing. In his village, yogurt was alive, made fresh, full of culture, thick enough to hold a spoon upright. It was part of the land, the animals, the people. Here, in the land of opportunity, it had become a factory product, processed, flattened, sugar-filled, soulless. Handy didn't say anything, but something shifted inside him, a quiet spark. What if he could bring the real taste to this country, not just a product, a memory, a piece of something ancient, something authentic? At the time, it seemed impossible. He had no money, no factory, no connections, just disappointment and an idea, but it stayed with him each time he saw yogurt in a fridge. He thought of the hills of Erzincan. Each time he tasted the thin, sugary paste sold in stores, he remembered his mother's recipe, stirred in silence by a wood-burning stove. Handy had come to America searching for a better future, but now he realized maybe America was missing something new, something simple, something pure, something true, and perhaps, just perhaps, he could be the one to bring it. Long before he dreamed of building an empire, Handy carried within him a treasure, the taste of his mother's yogurt. In their modest home in eastern Turkey, the kitchen was the heart of life, the smell of fresh bread, the crackle of wood burning in the stove, and above all, the cool, tangy scent of yogurt filled the air. His mother had no written recipes. Everything was done by instinct, by memory, by love. She would pour the warm milk into clay pots, wrap them gently in thick blankets, and wait. Hours later, she would lift the cloth to reveal the transformation, thick, creamy yogurt, alive with culture. Handy remembered the way she stirred it slowly, carefully, as if she were handling something sacred. He remembered the first spoonful she always gave him, smiling as he tasted. The yogurt wasn't just food. It was part of their identity, served with herbs in summer, with honey in winter, or mixed into soups and sauces. It was there at every meal, binding the family together. On cold nights, his mother would heat it gently, turning it into ayran, a warm, comforting drink that soothed tired bodies. During celebrations, she prepared it thick and rich, served with olives, bread, and laughter. Handy often sat beside her, watching every movement, asking questions. "How do you know when it's ready, Mother?" She would smile softly. "You feel it here," she said, pressing her hand to her heart. Yogurt is not about time, it's about care. Those words stayed with him, because for his mother, food was never only about feeding the body, it was about feeding the soul. Years later, sitting alone in a small New York apartment, Handy would close his eyes and remember the clay pots, the warmth of the blankets, the taste that carried both strength and comfort. And he realized something powerful. The yogurt in American stores might fill stomachs, but it did not feed hearts. It lacked the love, the patience, the spirit his mother poured into every batch. Those memories became his compass. They reminded him of who he was. They whispered that authenticity could never be replaced by convenience. And they planted a seed. One day, he would share this taste with the world. Because the greatest recipe his mother gave him wasn't written on paper. It was written in memory, in tradition, and in love. And that recipe would one day build an empire, with his mother's taste still fresh in his memory. Handy knew he couldn't just accept what he found in supermarkets. The American view of yogurt, so sweet and artificial, felt like a betrayal of what he knew and loved. But he was in an unfamiliar place, without resources, without support, and most importantly, without the perfect recipe his mother used to prepare. But Handy was not a man to be easily defeated. If the world around him didn't offer him the yogurt he knew, he would create his own. And so the journey began. In his small kitchen, he began experimenting, without large equipment, without detailed instructions, but with an immense desire to recapture that authentic flavor he knew was possible. Handy knew the secret lay in the perfect balance of temperature and time. Essential elements his mother had taught him, though never formally. For her, making yogurt was like caring for a plant. There was a rhythm, an understanding that only developed with time, and the touch of a passionate person. The first experiment was simple. Handy bought fresh milk and, using some yogurt culture from a store-bought container, tried to replicate his mother's process. He followed the steps as best he could, but in the end, the product wasn't what he expected. The yogurt was watery, lacking the deep, creamy flavor he remembered. He tried again, adjusting the temperatures and stirring differently, but the taste still wasn't right. Each failure was frustrating, but he didn't stop. He studied more, researched the market, and talked to people who knew a little about the process. He tested different types of milk, sought out new cultures, and over time, the first small victories began to emerge. Sometimes he would make yogurt in the morning, letting it brew while he went to work. When he returned, the aroma of fermentation greeted him. It was the smell of something familiar, something that somehow felt right, but it still lacked that final touch, that soul-stirring flavor. Over the next few weeks, Handy adjusted the timing, water temperature, and ingredient mixes. He began making yogurt with greater care, applying more precise techniques and greater attention to detail. No longer just an imitation of something lost, but an attempt to create something new, something he believed to be true, authentic, and capable of transforming the market. With each new batch, he got closer. The yogurt began to take on the consistency he remembered from afternoons at home in Turkey. He knew the flavor was almost there, but what kept him motivated wasn't just the desire to create the perfect product. It was something deeper, something that came from the heart. Handy wanted to give America real yogurt, the one rooted in tradition, history, and the culture he had brought with him. In those silent hours in the kitchen, he wasn't just making yogurt. He was reclaiming a part of himself. He was connecting the past to the future. Each spoonful was a step closer to transforming his mother's memory into a product that would touch millions of people. And then, finally, after so many attempts, something happened. The yogurt was right, not perfect, but good. The taste was there, thick, creamy, with the authentic flavor Handy remembered from afternoons in his village. That moment was more than a culinary achievement. It was a sign. It was the beginning of something bigger, because Handy knew that with that yogurt, he had something real to offer the world. And he knew, without a doubt, that this was just the beginning. Amidst his experiments, between failures and small victories, Handy began to ask himself a simple but powerful question. What if Americans tried real yogurt? It was a question that had been forming in his mind, but one that, until that moment, he had never dared to say out loud. He knew the American market was full of sweet, processed, soulless yogurts, but deep down, he believed there was something more, something real, something authentic, something no one else had brought to light. He wondered for a moment, what if I could share the taste of home with them? What if real yogurt was as good as the people back home said? On those lonely afternoons, after yet another failed attempt to replicate the perfect recipe, he would close his eyes and imagine the shelves of American supermarkets. They were full, but something was missing. It lacked authenticity. It lacked the flavor he knew so well, the one his mother made with such care. He asked himself, over and over again, what if I brought that flavor here? What held him back was fear. The fear of not being able to do it. The fear of investing time, energy, and money in something that might not work. He didn't have a brand name. He didn't have enough money. He didn't have a factory. But there was one thing he did have: conviction. He felt deep down that the world needed real yogurt. He began to visualize the packaging, the yogurt pots, the name, something simple, something that was true to tradition, but also appealing to the modern market. He wondered how people would react, how the creamy texture and authentic flavor could impact the choices of millions of Americans, until then accustomed to yogurt devoid of history, flavor, or truth. What if this made a difference? He thought. He already knew that Americans loved new products, loved connecting with something authentic. They just didn't know what they were missing. Hamdi saw the possible future clearly in his mind. What if I could bring the best of my homeland here? What might happen if Americans actually experienced real yogurt? With its unmistakable, fresh, and genuine flavor, the idea formed like a bolt of clarity in his mind. Yogurt wasn't just a food, it was a bridge between cultures, between the simplicity of the Turkish mountains and the beating heart of America. And he felt, with a quiet conviction, that this was his path. What if, he wondered, what if they loved it? And however unlikely, however difficult the journey ahead, he felt he had to try, not just for himself, but for everyone who loved the taste of tradition. Because, in the end, it wasn't about competing with the big boys. It was about bringing something real, something no one else had done. What if Americans tasted real yogurt? He knew that question was key, and in that moment, Hamdi made the decision. He wouldn't wait any longer. He would begin paving the way, one small step at a time, until he transformed that true flavor into something the whole world could experience. It was time to take a risk, and he was ready. Hamdi Ulukay's life began to change one ordinary morning when he came across an ad in the local newspaper. A yogurt factory was for sale. It was a small, bankrupt factory with old equipment and an uncertain future. For most people, this was a danger sign. Who would buy a factory no one else wanted? But for Hamdi, that announcement was like a calling. He knew that to realize his dream, he would need more than an idea. He would need a space, a foundation to transform the yogurt he envisioned into something the world could taste. The factory was in ruins. The price was low, but the condition of the facility was a nightmare. When Hamdi visited, the structure was in disrepair. The floor was covered in dust. The machines were rusty and broken. There was no life there, no vision, no vibration of success. It was a place that had been forgotten, that had failed. Most people would look and see only frustration and failure. Hamdi, however, looked at it and saw potential. He didn't see an old, forgotten factory. He saw a chance to rebuild, to give the place a second life. He knew the factory wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. But as always, there was fear of failure, fear of investing everything he had in something so uncertain. What did he know about factories? What did he know about large-scale management? He barely knew how the mass production process worked. His experience was in home experiments, in small batches. He had never worked in such a large operation, nor imagined what it would take to bring a product to market. He had no money. What little he had was almost all spent in the first few months, trying to adapt and survive. Besides, the idea of borrowing money seemed impossible. However, Hamdi couldn't afford to back down now. He knew that if he wanted to bring real yogurt to market, he would have to take this step, risk everything. What do I have to lose? He asked himself. He didn't have much, but what he did have was a dream, and that dream was worth more than any risk he could take. After weeks of hesitation, Hamdi made a decision. He would use what he had, take out a loan from the U.S. Small Business Administration, and buy that factory. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He knew the path would be arduous and full of challenges, but he also knew that the yogurt he wanted to create couldn't be made in an already saturated market. He needed to build his own foundation with his own two hands. The decision was made, and at that moment, the factory was officially purchased. He stood there, looking at the empty buildings, wondering what was to come. It wasn't a victory. It was just the beginning. But somehow, Hamdi knew that this factory no one wanted was what he needed to begin making his dream a reality. It was his chance to do what he'd always dreamed of. And with a mixture of fear and excitement, he took the first step on the journey that would change his life forever. It was one ordinary day, as Hamdi tried to navigate yet another endless work routine, that his eyes fell upon something unexpected. He was leafing through a local newspaper, his mind still focused on the exhaustion of long hours, when suddenly something caught his eye. a small ad in the classified section, almost forgotten among so many other job postings and real estate listings. It was a simple, almost negligible advertisement that read, "Yogurt factory for sale. Price negotiable, needs renovation." The words seemed small and distant, but Handy read them again. Something inside him stirred. Yogurt factory, he wondered. For sale, he had never considered acquiring a factory, much less a yogurt factory. He knew that to bring the authentic yogurt he loved, he would need more than his experience in makeshift kitchens. But a factory, it was a bold idea. Who would buy a yogurt factory that was for sale? And most importantly, what would he, with limited resources, do with something so large and far removed from his reality? As his thoughts swirled, Handy couldn't shake his curiosity. "I need to know more," he thought. It was as if fate had placed before him a unique opportunity, a sign, perhaps, that he couldn't ignore. He made a call. The voice on the other end was cold and distant, but it informed him that the factory was located in an industrial area far from the city, with old equipment and infrastructure that had seen better times. They had been trying to sell the facility for months, without success. The reason was clear: no one wanted it. The factory was in ruins. It had once been a respected yogurt brand, but had gone bankrupt due to mismanagement, and now it was for sale at a paltry price, a fraction of its heyday. The owner wanted to get rid of the property quickly. To most, it seemed more like a nightmare than an opportunity. But for Handy, something about that announcement sparked a surge of courage. He looked at the phone in his hand, took a deep breath, and the question loomed large in his mind. What if I made this my chance? He knew the factory wasn't just an old, worn-out structure to him. It represented something much bigger, a chance to bring real yogurt to life. A yogurt that represented authenticity, tradition, and most importantly, his own vision. What else could he do? He was in a country where everything seemed new, where everything seemed challenging. But at that moment, Handy felt the factory was his only chance to bring something genuine to the world. He hung up the phone, still with doubt in his heart, but also with a burning flame. In that moment, he knew it wouldn't be easy. He knew the path would be full of obstacles. But that ad, with its simplicity, represented more than a business opportunity. It represented the possibility of doing something big, something that meant more than money, something that would touch people. It was an abandoned factory, but in Handy's mind, it became the key to the future. The idea began to take shape. His vision began to come to life. He knew the yogurt he wanted to create couldn't be produced in the conventional industry. He needed that factory. It was there that he would make the yogurt that would change everything. And with this silent conviction, Handy took the first step towards something he never imagined possible. The challenge was before him, and he was ready to face it. Handy knew he couldn't do it all alone. He had taken the first step by finding the factory, but now he needed something more: money. Lack of resources had always been a barrier, but now the need was urgent. Without capital, he wouldn't be able to bring his idea to life. The factory was there, waiting, but the cost of restoring it was exorbitant. He needed a loan, and the most obvious place to turn was the banks. He began scheduling meetings, but soon realized the path would be more difficult than he imagined. When he entered the first meeting room, he was greeted with a suspicious look. The bank executives were interested in one thing: profit. They didn't see what Handy saw in the old yogurt factory. They saw only a risk. You have no experience with factories. You don't have a good credit score. And the yogurt market, well, it's very saturated, said one of the bankers, already calculating the risks of the investment in his mind. Why would anyone buy yogurt from a factory that no one else wants? The words cut like sharp blades. Handy tried to explain, tried to show that the product he wanted to create wasn't just another yogurt. He was bringing something authentic, something real. But the bankers were immersed in their own numbers, their own risk assessments. Nothing he said seemed to make sense. To them, he could see the skepticism on their faces, the disdain. We're willing to take risks, but without a good track record, this won't work. The meeting ended there, with no room for further explanation, no hope for a possible future. But Handy didn't give up. He knew that if he wanted to make his dream come true, he would have to be persistent. he looked for other options. That's when he heard about the Small Business Administration, SBA, a chance for entrepreneurs like him, with little experience or funding, but with a vision. Perhaps they would understand his dream differently. The first meeting at the SBA was equally difficult. The loan officer looked at him with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. He had seen many other immigrants try their luck and fail, and he wasn't ready to invest in yet another project that seemed promising but dubious. Hamdi tried to explain his vision once again. He spoke of the yogurt he wanted to create, the traditions he wanted to share with the world, and the need to bring something authentic to Americans. He wasn't just asking for money, he was asking for a chance to prove that what he envisioned could work, but the odds were stacked against him. The SBA official listed the difficulties. The factory was in ruins, the yogurt market was saturated, and most importantly, Hamdi didn't have enough resources to cover renovation and production costs. If you don't have a more solid plan, we can't help you, the officer said, leaving Hamdi feeling like everything he wanted to build could come undone in a single blow. At that moment, Hamdi felt a deep weight. He was knocking on closed doors, but he didn't know what to do but fight. I can't turn back now, he thought. I can't. Time passed, and he continued to receive rejections, but each no strengthened him, making his resolve stronger. He decided to take another chance, perhaps for a last attempt. He went to a local bank and asked for a meeting with a loan officer. He brought his calculations and notes and explained what he intended to do. He didn't have much yet, but he had something others didn't see, a passion that transcended numbers and a vision that could truly change the way people ate yogurt. After several more attempts and exhaustive presentations, a bank finally decided to give him a chance, but with strict conditions. They didn't believe he could pay everything back immediately, so they decided to take a risk on a small loan, but with high interest rates and immediate repayment requirements. For Hamdi, this was his only chance. He accepted the terms, signed the contract, and, with the weight of the world on his shoulders, took the money. He knew that this decision would not only shape his future, but also determine the viability of his dream. The factory was purchased, the loan was secured. The risk was enormous, but he had taken the first real step toward what could be the greatest challenge of his life, turning a forgotten place into an empire. And deep down, he knew that, despite all the obstacles, he could never turn back. In the days that followed the purchase of the factory, Hamdi was unsure whether he was heading toward the greatest achievement of his life or imminent disaster. He had risked everything, his money, his savings, his uncertain future, and now, before him, the factory stood empty, silent, and far from any vision of success. He could feel the weight of the decision with every step, every minute he spent in his new workspace. Should I risk everything? The question reverberated in his mind. When night fell and he retreated to the small apartment where he lived, alone, his mind teeming with thoughts, he couldn't shake that doubt. He had dreamed of this for so long, but now that he was faced with reality, the magnitude of what he had done consumed him. What did he have? A hefty loan, a dilapidated factory, and a saturated market. With industry giants dominating the shelves, did he really have what it took to compete? Each decision seemed to involve even greater risk. Was he willing to pay the price? What would happen if he failed? If the yogurt didn't gain acceptance? If the market rejected his vision? Hamdi began to wonder if he had underestimated the magnitude of the challenge. He considered returning to his old life, away from the pressure and fear. But what would that mean? Would he return to being the man who lived with regret? The man who lacked the courage to pursue his dream? The factory, which had seemed such an obvious opportunity months before, now felt like a burden. The smoky walls, the broken machinery, the crumbling infrastructure. The vision of transforming the place into something big seemed distant, almost impossible. The weight of the investment, the responsibility to the employees, the pressure from the SBA, all these factors added up. Hamdi thought of his family, of his mother, who had always believed in him. She who had taught him that hard work always pays off, and yet, he felt doubt eating away at his confidence. She had never known what it meant to be so alone, without a clear path. When he had left her in Turkey, she had known he would find a future, but she had never imagined he would risk everything for something so uncertain. Would she be proud? Handy wondered. He remembered his mother's words, "If you believe in what you do it with all your heart." But his heart was heavy, and doubt crept into every thought. That night, after another long and troubled day, Handy sat in the old chair in the factory room and looked around. Nothing there looked promising. The place was empty, lifeless, and the smell of dust and neglect filled the air. He thought about the future. What would happen if he couldn't make the perfect yogurt? What if no one bought it? What if he failed? He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to push the thoughts away. But the doubt was still there, squeezing his chest. The fear of losing everything paralyzed him, and yet, something inside him resisted. He couldn't give up now, not after he'd come this far. He couldn't let fear control his vision. He knew that every great feat requires sacrifice, requires courage, and what he wanted, what he believed in, deserved more than just doubt. It deserved action. Handy rose from his chair. He walked to the window and looked out at the city, illuminated by the lights of New York. He knew the path would be arduous, full of obstacles, but at the same time, he knew there was no turning back. The risk had already been taken, and now, he needed to make it work, not for himself, but for everyone who believed he could achieve something greater. "I will do this work. I have to." He took a deep breath, feeling stronger, more determined. The doubt didn't disappear, but he learned something important in that moment. Fear is part of the process. The risk will always be there. The question wasn't whether he should take that risk, but how he would react to it. And in that moment, he decided he wouldn't let fear paralyze him. He would take a chance, because sometimes the biggest risk of all is not trying. It was 2005 when Handy Ulikaya made the decision that would change his life forever. The sign for the abandoned yogurt factory, which he had seen months earlier, still echoed in his mind. The weathered brick walls, the rusting machinery, and the smell of abandonment, it all seemed a reflection of his own struggle, but also an opportunity he couldn't ignore. He knew the risk was enormous. His vision seemed far from reality. The factory was in ruins. No one wanted the place anymore. Many saw it as an imminent failure, and he knew it. But when he looked at the building, Handy saw something else. He saw potential. He saw a chance to bring something authentic, something truly important, to a market that was starved for it. With little business experience and no factory management experience, Handy faced a dilemma. He had the vision, the passion, and the belief in what he was creating, but he lacked sufficient resources. He had no money, no support, and most financial institutions were reluctant to trust an immigrant who barely knew the ropes of the food industry. But the truth was, he had no other option. He couldn't turn back. The decision to buy that factory, despite his fear and doubts, was the only way to turn his idea into reality. He decided to take the first step, armed only with a vision and the help of a small loan from the Small Business Administration, SBA. Handy managed to make the impossible happen. He closed the deal with the factory owner and thus bought a piece of the future, a piece of something he knew could be big. The transaction was simple on paper, but emotionally overwhelming for Handy. He signed the documents, and at that moment, the factory became his. He didn't own much, but he had a dream, and that was enough to get him there. In that moment, as he stared at the signed papers, Handy asked himself, "What do I do now?" He had a factory, but what would he do with it? That lifeless building was so far from any image of success he had in mind. The weight of the decision seemed to crush him. He knew this purchase was the beginning of something big, but also the beginning of an immense risk. What would happen if he failed, leaving the office with the paperwork signed and the purchase complete? He looked at the building for the first time as his own. The old factory was now his responsibility. He felt the weight of the decision settle on his shoulders. He knew he had purchased not just a physical space, but a major challenge. It was there, in front of that building, that Handy made the definitive decision. He would make this work, no matter the cost. He wouldn't let fear or doubt paralyze him. The vision of creating true yogurt, of bringing something genuine and authentic to the market, could not be defeated by obstacles. This was what he wanted, what he believed in, and he knew the time had come. As he left the factory that day, with the key in his hand and the feeling of having taken the biggest step of his life, Handy asked himself one last question: am I ready for this? But the answer didn't come in words, it came in actions, and Handy was ready to act. He had taken the first step toward the future, a future he now knew would be built with much more than faith and courage. It would be built with the hard work of rebuilding what seemed lost, with the care to restore not only the factory but also its vision. Now, he was ready to make the impossible happen. When Handy first entered the factory that was now his, the air was heavy. The place was immersed in a profound silence, broken only by the sound of his footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. The brick walls were covered in moss and dirt, and the once imposing ceiling was stained and cracked. The smell was musty and abandoned, as if the factory had been forgotten for decades. The machines sat idle, rusting, and the large fermentation tanks were covered in dust, devoid of any sign of life. Nothing there seemed to have been touched by careful hands for a long time. The atmosphere was desolate. Handy knew that what he now held in his hands was not a thriving factory, it was a skeleton, an empty shell of a place that had once held some kind of value. But what he saw was more than ruins. He saw potential. He looked around and felt the weight of the task before him. The space was vast, more vast than he had ever imagined. But it was like an open field, filled with invisible obstacles. The place was so far from his vision of a thriving yogurt business that it seemed almost impossible to imagine a future there. The work would be immense, more than he could accomplish alone. And most importantly, he had neither the experience nor the resources to handle it effectively. But what he did have was an unshakable belief in his dream, and a determination that, despite his fear, only grew with every second he spent in that abandoned space. Handy sat for a moment on the cement floor, his eyes fixed on the dirty walls and the yogurt tanks that had once been used but were now unused. He knew the first step was to clean up, not just the physical environment, but also the mindset. He had to make this work. He couldn't fail. In the following days, he began renovations. He didn't have much money, and what he had was already being spent on the purchase costs and the loan he would have to pay off. But he knew that if he wanted to turn the factory into a real business, he would need to do the hard work first. The first task was to clean up the grime accumulated from years of neglect. He did it alone, using buckets, brooms, and brushes. Sweat dripping down his face, he dusted the walls, washed the rusty tanks, and removed the old, unusable machinery. It was exhausting work, but he was determined to create something here. Each day at the factory was a test of patience. Handy spent hours cleaning, removing broken parts, and analyzing what could be reused. In some parts of the factory, he could barely see where the walls ended and the floor began. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dirt and decay. He knew he couldn't do it alone for long, so he began hiring people, simple workers, some also immigrants like himself, willing to help restore what seemed impossible to restore. Together, they began the most complex renovations. He purchased new fermentation tanks and revamped the plumbing and electrical systems. He couldn't afford to hire expensive specialists, so he spent sleepless nights trying to figure out how to reconfigure the machinery, learn about manufacturing processes, and even figure out how to operate equipment he barely knew how to operate. It was hard and often frustrating work. Handy encountered countless difficulties. The machines didn't work as they should. The temperature wasn't correct. The first batches of yogurt he tried came out with a bitter taste, far from what he expected. But instead of becoming discouraged, he used each mistake as a learning experience, and the failures as a push to keep going. The factory slowly came to life, but progress was painfully slow. Handy, immersed in his task, felt the days drag by, with no guarantee that everything would work out. The nights were long and endless, and doubts began to creep in again. Was he doing everything right? Would the yogurt finally taste the way he wanted? Could he create a brand that people would actually buy? But he didn't stop. He kept going, one step at a time, one attempt at a time, because he knew the only way to make this dream a reality was to keep working, no matter how hard it got. Months passed, and the factory, still far from what Handy had dreamed of, began. To reflect his efforts, the once desolate place was now bustling with activity. The sound of machines operating, the smell of yogurt beginning to take shape, and the rhythm of the people working within began to signal that, maybe, just maybe, he was on the right track. Handy knew that creating yogurt wasn't just about gathering ingredients. He understood that the true flavor of his product needed to carry the memory of his homeland, the taste of the mountains, the freshness of sheep's milk, and the creaminess of the recipes his mother made with such care. But transforming this vision into something concrete and marketable would be no easy task. In the early days after renovating the factory, the only thing he knew for sure was that he had to start with flavors and textures. If he wanted consumers to like his product, the flavor had to be perfect. He couldn't take any chances. He needed to make this yogurt not just good, but unique, something people would remember as soon as they tasted it. The first attempt was simple. Handy bought fresh milk and, using what he knew from his memories, began experimenting. He knew how his mother made yogurt. The milk needed to be heated to the right temperature. The yogurt cultures needed to be added precisely, and the fermentation time needed to be just right to create the creamy, dense texture he remembered. But what he didn't know and soon realized was that the industrialization process changed everything. The machines, which he didn't fully master, didn't help control the temperature as precisely as he'd hoped. The fermentation time seemed more unpredictable than expected. The flavor, with each attempt, was still not right. The yogurt was either too acidic or too watery. He felt he was far from what he wanted to create. He made adjustments, trial and error. Each batch was a new version, a new chance to find the perfect balance between flavor and texture. Handy spent days studying how different types of milk influenced the yogurt's flavor. He experimented with goat's milk, sheep's milk, and even pasteurized cow's milk to see which produced the best results. He knew that each milk variation could completely change the yogurt's flavor and texture. But the real question was how to make the yogurt thick and creamy without losing the lightness and freshness he loved so much. Furthermore, he needed to ensure the yogurt was authentic, something American consumers hadn't experienced before. The market was saturated with sweet, processed yogurts filled with artificial additives. Handy wanted something genuine, without artificial colors or preservatives. The challenge was maintaining authenticity, but also achieving a texture that would appeal to a wider audience, who might not have the same appreciation for traditional yogurt as he did. As the weeks passed, Handy began developing a formula that finally began to approximate the flavor he was looking for. The yogurt became thicker, with the creaminess he remembered from mornings at home. But it still wasn't perfect. He knew the finishing touch wasn't just the texture or flavor. There was something more. The yogurt experience needed to be complete, something comforting, something that brought back memories of home, but also accessible to the palates of a completely new market. Texture research was also a challenging journey. Handy knew the yogurt needed to be creamy, but not heavy. It needed to be easy to eat, yet still have that rich consistency that would leave people feeling satisfied. He worked on fermenting with different resting times, testing how much fat he should leave in the yogurt to achieve the perfect balance. The process was long. Handy spent sleepless nights, sometimes alone, sometimes with the help of some employees he had hired for the factory. Together, they discussed possibilities and tried new approaches. At times, the effort seemed in vain, but he knew he couldn't give up. The flavor was starting to emerge, but he didn't want to sell something that was merely good. He wanted something exceptional, something that made people feel like they were part of something real. Over time, the yogurt began to come closer to his vision. It was thick, creamy, and most importantly, authentic. He knew that this flavor was what he wanted to offer the world, the flavor he had known growing up in Turkey, the taste of a tradition, the essence of a land. What Handy didn't know was that those first batches, imperfect, with mistakes and adjustments, would be the foundation of something much greater. He was creating more than a product. He was creating an experience that, when presented correctly, could resonate with consumers across an entire country. And that was just the beginning. After months of experimentation, tinkering, and dedication, Hamdi finally had what he considered his first perfect batch of yogurt. It was thick, creamy, and had the authentic flavor he'd been searching for. The product was ready. Now, he needed to test it in the market, but he knew that wouldn't be easy. Hamdi decided to launch the yogurt with a modest approach. Without significant resources for an advertising campaign, he sought out small local markets to get started. He knew that market acceptance would reflect not only the product's authenticity, but also the experience he could create around the brand. The first challenge arose soon after launch. Stores were willing to carry the yogurt, but soon difficulties began. The yogurt was well received, but not in the way Hamdi had hoped. Instead of praising its quality and authenticity, consumers began complaining about its consistency. Many found the yogurt thicker than they were used to, denser, and difficult to eat. He remembered his mother's words, "Yogurt needs to be experienced, not just eaten." But in the eyes of consumers, the texture wasn't pleasant enough. The flavor was there, but the experience wasn't. It was a difficult lesson, but an important one. Creating something authentic didn't mean everyone was ready to embrace it. Hamdi didn't give up. Instead of giving in, he realized he needed to improve the consumer experience by adjusting the texture without compromising quality. He began testing different fermentation processes, adjusting the resting time, and even altering the ingredient mix. But the journey wasn't easy. Each batch felt like a failed attempt. Each piece of feedback a critique that demanded more of his vision and work. After several attempts, Hamdi made another discovery. Packaging, seemingly simple, also affected product perception. The first packaging he used was traditional, but lacking visual appeal. He realized that people generally bought based on what they saw first. The packaging needed to represent the product's quality. He changed the packaging design, seeking something more modern and appealing, without losing the essence of its tradition. But the problems didn't stop there. Even with improved packaging and a tweaked product, local markets began returning unsold products. Demand wasn't growing as he'd imagined. Hamdi was frustrated, but once again, he didn't give up. He knew he was on the right track, but he couldn't expect everything to happen overnight. He began soliciting more feedback directly from consumers, asking what needed to be improved to make them enjoy his yogurt more. It was then, after a series of interactions, that Hamdi realized what was truly missing: consumer education. People needed to understand what was behind the yogurt he was creating. They needed to know that this wasn't an ordinary product, it was a yogurt made by hand, with natural ingredients and a history of tradition. He needed to better communicate his story and the production process, showcasing what made his yogurt unique and genuine. It was then that Hamdi decided to take a bolder step. He began organizing local tastings, where he personally explained to consumers how the yogurt was made, the care put into each batch, and the difference it made in health and flavor. He invited people to try it, so they could experience for themselves the authenticity he so strongly believed in. The tastings began to gain traction. People were beginning to understand what Hamdi was offering, but success was still tentative. The market was resistant, and he knew consumers needed to get used to a more authentic product, different from the standard yogurts dominating the shelves. As the days passed, Hamdi tweaked and refined the product, always listening to customer feedback and addressing any minor flaws. The yogurt now had the ideal texture, creamier yet light, with an authentic flavor that was pleasing even to those unfamiliar with the intensity of natural products. Finally, after many attempts and adjustments, Hamdi saw acceptance begin to grow. Sales began to increase, slowly at first, but with a solid base of consumers who already recognized the quality and authenticity of his product. He realized that, despite the initial failures, each mistake had been a learning opportunity. That was his first real victory, a sign that he was on the right track. He knew the market was still a long way off, but he finally began to feel his vision was being embraced not by the entire industry, but by the people who mattered most, the consumers who enjoyed real yogurt. Hamdi's work was just beginning, but he had already won the first battle, proving that, despite the obstacles, authenticity would always have a place in people's hearts. Hamdi Ulukay's quest to create something more than just yogurt wasn't limited to product quality alone. For him, the name also had to reflect the product's soul, something that conveyed authenticity, tradition, and, above all, the essence of his heritage. He knew the name he chose would carry immense weight. It would be people's first impression of his yogurt, their first connection to the story he was trying to tell. In his early days at the factory, Hamdi found himself constantly thinking about the name. He knew he needed something memorable, something simple, yet also unique and powerful. But above all, the name needed to reflect his story. It needed to speak to his homeland, his childhood, and the yogurt tradition he was trying to preserve. Hamdi knew the product he was creating wasn't just food. It was a part of himself, an extension of his heritage. He wanted people to feel that way when they said the name. So he began to think about the words of his native Kurdish, searching for something authentic and meaningful. The idea of using a Kurdish word didn't seem far-fetched. In their culture, many names were linked to work, tradition, and a simple yet meaningful life. After days of trying to find the right words, the answer came almost as a revelation. The term that resonated most with him was Çoban, a word that meant shepherd in Turkish. For Hamdi, the word held profound meaning. Shepherds, like his father, were responsible for tending their flocks and passing on wisdom from generation to generation. They were figures of respect, wisdom, and tradition. The shepherd not only cared for the flock, but also guarded the simple, authentic values that Hamdi wanted to bring to the market. Çoban wasn't just a word to Hamdi. It was a symbol of everything he stood for. He felt like a shepherd, carrying on the legacy of his family, his culture, and now, a product he believed was the real yogurt, the one people needed to discover. However, in trying to use Çoban directly, he knew it might be difficult for Western consumers to pronounce the word correctly. He wanted something that would be accessible and memorable for an American audience, but still convey the essence of what it meant. It was then that he had an idea. He decided to adapt the word, making it more fluid for the Western market, but without losing its original meaning. He simply changed the spelling of Çoban to Chobani, a more pronounceable version that still maintained the connection to his roots. And the symbol of his name, Chobani, was simple, sonorous, and conveyed a sense of authenticity and origin. For Hamdi, it was perfect. It was as if he had managed to capture the soul of his land and put it into a word that simultaneously represented his personal story and the promise of quality and tradition he wanted to offer consumers. When he saw the name Chobani, he knew he had found the right choice. It wasn't just a name for a yogurt brand. It was a word that told the world that this yogurt wasn't like any other. It was made with the same care and respect a shepherd gives his flock, with the same love and dedication a mother gives her child. It was a name that spoke of a deep history, an unchanging tradition, and a commitment to quality. With the name Chobani now chosen, Hamdi felt the product had finally found its identity. It was the name that united his passion, his story, and the authenticity of his vision. He knew that when people heard Chobani, they weren't just buying yogurt, they were buying a genuine experience, a connection to something real and true. Now that he had his name decided, Hamdi knew he was ready to launch his brand into the world. The journey was just beginning, but with Chobani in his heart and on his shelves, he felt the future had finally begun to take shape. With the name Chobani chosen and the factory finally operational, Hamdi Ulukaya was about to take a crucial step, bringing his yogurt to market. But unlike large companies, he didn't have a large budget to invest in marketing or advertising. He was starting small, with what he had, in local markets, a modest approach, but at the same time, full of hope and determination. Hamdi started with neighborhood markets, those that, at first glance, seemed too small for a product he believed would be revolutionary. But he knew he had to start somewhere. So he armed himself with boxes of Chobani yogurt, carefully packed, the containers, and personally went to the markets he believed would be most open to trying something new. Upon entering the first store, the manager looked at him suspiciously. Hamdi introduced himself with a shy smile, trying to convince the manager to try his yogurt. He knew the key to convincing the stores would be the quality of the product and the passion he carried behind it. He talked about the authenticity of the yogurt, the tradition he was bringing from Turkey, and the purity of the ingredients. The The manager, with a skeptical expression, finally accepted a small delivery, promising to test the product. The first batch of Chobani arrived on shelves with a mix of anticipation and uncertainty. Handy was nervous. He knew the product was good, but the market was huge and saturated with dominant brands. How could he compete with giant companies that had been in the market for decades? As the first few weeks passed, Handy realized that sales weren't as strong as he'd hoped. Yogurt wasn't flying off the shelves. People passing by the aisles glanced curiously, but didn't buy. Market feedback was lukewarm. What was missing? Why weren't consumers being drawn in as he'd hoped? On one of these visits to local markets, Handy stopped in front of the shelf where Chobani was displayed. He saw something that made him think for a moment. The packaging design, despite being simple and straightforward, wasn't capturing consumers' attention. He noticed that most yogurt brands had more vibrant packaging, with bold colors and eye-catching images. He knew he needed something more to stand out. Over the next few weeks, Handy personally visited each market, speaking with managers and asking what consumers were saying. Some mentioned that the yogurt seemed thicker than they were used to. Others weren't ready to try something new, especially in a market already saturated with so many options. He realized that the yogurt he was creating wasn't just a different product. It was a different experience, something people needed to be educated to appreciate. It was then that he decided to start educating consumers. He began organizing small tastings in stores where his product was sold. Handy would stand next to the shelves, offering customers a spoonful of Chobani, explaining the product's history, its origins, and the care with which it was made. He explained how the yogurt they were used to buying was saturated with preservatives and additives, while Chobani was made with simple, natural ingredients. He invited people to try it and experience the difference. These tastings began to generate curiosity. People who tried Chobani were surprised by the yogurt's flavor and texture, something traditional brands didn't offer. Gradually, sales began to grow, but slowly. Handy knew the work was still far from done, but he was beginning to gain ground. The big test came when Chobani was introduced to other local markets, and feedback began to become more positive. Some consumers began returning for more. What had previously been an unknown product struggling to sell was now beginning to gain the loyalty of its first customers. The positive response from some consumers began to spread to other markets, and Handy finally felt the relief he'd been waiting for. The yogurt was gaining acceptance, but he knew it was still early days. The road to reaching a wider audience was long, but he now had real proof that the product had value. Over the next few days, with each delivery made and each new store added, Handy felt his idea, the vision of bringing authentic yogurt to Americans, finally taking shape. He was no longer just selling a product, he was selling a story, and people were starting to listen. Handy was having another ordinary day at the store where his yogurt was being sold, but he knew he still had a long way to go. Sales had improved slightly, but growth was still slow. He knew the product was good, he believed in it deeply, but he also knew the market was huge, and he was still struggling to establish his brand. Handy always made a point of being present in stores, especially those that sold Chobani. He knew that, as good as yogurt was, it needed a personal connection with the consumer. And it was on one such day that he found himself in the middle of another tasting session in front of the shelves. He was enthusiastically explaining the history of yogurt, offering spoonfuls to passersby and talking about the product's origins, its traditions, and its fresh ingredients. That's when a woman approached. She seemed skeptical at first, but accepted the spoonful of Chobani with a shy smile. She tasted the yogurt slowly, seemingly savoring every bite. Handy was used to mixed reactions, some of surprise, others of hesitation. But what happened next was something he would never forget. The lady looked at him with a soft gaze and said, her voice thick with emotion, "This yogurt tastes like home." Handy froze for a moment. Her words were music to his ears. He'd heard them many times in his head, but now, hearing them from a stranger, someone he'd never met before, felt surreal. She wasn't just saying the yogurt was good. She was saying he'd done something bigger. He'd created something that connected people to their own stories, to their own roots. Handy felt a wave of emotion course through him. He'd never imagined a simple yogurt could convey so much emotion. That woman, with that comment, had made it all worth it. He knew the path had been arduous, with failures, difficulties, and rejections. But in that moment, everything seemed to have fallen into place. He smiled at her, thanking her deeply. "I grew up with this flavor. It comes from home, from my land," he said, touched, unable to hide the emotion in his voice. She smiled back, as if sharing a secret with him, a memory of childhood and home. Handy realized, in that instant, that yogurt wasn't just about the ingredients. It wasn't just about the quality of the milk or the fermentation time. What he had created was an emotional connection. He had made something that touched people deep in their hearts, something that brought back memories and feelings of home, of a simpler, more authentic time. That moment was a turning point for Handy. It wasn't just about sales or profit. It was about impacting people's lives, about offering them a genuine experience. He felt that the mission he had in mind to bring real yogurt to the world was finally being recognized. He wasn't just creating a product. He was sharing a part of himself, a part of his culture and his story. That simple phrase, "This yogurt tastes like home," wasn't just a positive reaction. It was validation of everything Handy believed and worked to achieve. It was the reassurance that he was on the right path. He knew, clearly, that the road ahead would still be full of challenges. But in that moment, he felt something deeper. He had found a place in people's hearts. He had touched a chord, something many products simply couldn't. And as he looked at the Chobani shelves, Handy knew he had created more than just a business. He had created a story, a genuine connection with consumers, and that was what truly mattered. Because for Handy Ulukaya, home wasn't just a place, it was a feeling, an experience, a memory that he now shared with the world. After months of steady growth, Handy Ulukaya finally managed to establish Chobani as a recognizable brand in smaller markets. However, the road ahead was far from easy. The yogurt was beginning to attract more attention. But at the same time, it was entering a territory dominated by dairy giants, huge companies with years of history, massive marketing budgets, and the ability to swallow up any competitor with their distribution muscle. Handy knew the real test was just beginning. He was up against brands that not only had the financial muscle, but also the control of supermarket shelves where Chobani needed to be to grow. Big dairy brands like Yoplait and Dannon had already cornered the yogurt market, offering affordable and popular products. These companies had years of experience, a massive infrastructure, and an established connection with consumers. But Handy wasn't afraid. He knew the market was changing. There was a growing desire for more authentic, natural products and products more connected to cultural roots. The customer experience with regular yogurt was what he wanted to change. He knew that if he could establish himself in the big supermarket chains, he could challenge the status quo. But he also knew he would have to confront these big brands head-on. The first major challenge came when Handy tried to introduce Chobani to major supermarket chains. As he entered the major meetings with the chains, he quickly realized he wasn't just pitching his product, he was taking on an empire. He encountered buyers who, while curious about the product, were deeply skeptical. These buyers were committed to established brands and unwilling to take a risk on a new yogurt brand without a proven track record. What Handy began to realize was that big brands were using their distribution power to maintain immense dominance on the shelves. They had exclusive contracts with supermarket chains, a virtually unbeatable distribution network, and much lower prices due to mass production. To him, each negotiation felt like another fight for a place in the already saturated market. But Handy didn't give up. Instead of giving up, he took a different approach. He wasn't competing with the giants solely on price, but on authenticity. He knew Chobani wasn't just another yogurt. It was offering a genuine experience, with quality and flavor that big brands couldn't match. The story of its yogurt made with passion, care, and tradition was something traditional brands couldn't replicate. He began reinforcing his brand. Chobani wasn't just a yogurt, it was a movement. He used his own story as a tool to connect with consumers. He began speaking directly to customers, with campaigns focused on authenticity and well-being, something big brands weren't approaching in the same way. Handy also began strengthening his online and social media presence, something that major brands weren't doing with the same authenticity. He used social media as a platform to humanize the brand. He shared not only the product, but also his personal story, his journey from a small village in Turkey to success in the United States. He made people connect with Chobani on an emotional level, something industry giants had never done so directly. Furthermore, he realized that innovation was key to standing out. Handy began introducing new flavors and combinations that big brands weren't offering. He introduced more natural options, with fewer additives and simpler ingredients. He wanted consumers to feel they were experiencing something real, something fresh, something that stood out not for quantity, but for quality. The first results began to appear. Chobani began to grow within major supermarket chains. But this did not come without resistance. Big brands began to notice the impact Chobani was having on their shelves, and it wasn't long before they began to react. They tried to imitate Chobani's formula, launching their own versions of Greek yogurt, trying to enter the market with products that resembled Handy's. But unlike many who would have given in to an already saturated market, Handy realized an important truth. Chobani's difference wasn't in imitating big brands, but in maintaining authenticity. He maintained a focus on product quality and genuine relationships with his consumers. As the conflict with major brands intensified, Handy also positioned himself as a champion of honesty in the food industry. He began speaking openly about how most major brands used artificial additives, excessive sugars, and industrial processes that compromised product quality. He wanted to demonstrate that the real competition wasn't price, but authenticity and quality. The first signs of success began to appear as Chobani established itself as a household name on shelves. Chobani's Greek yogurt business began to grow, and Handy finally realized what he already knew deep down. The true strength of his brand lay not in beating the big players on price or scale, but in maintaining what he valued most, authenticity. As demand for Chobani increased, sales began to soar. Supermarket shelves began to fill faster. The authentic flavor and emotional connection with consumers gave the product a competitive advantage. Growth was so rapid that Handy had to expand production to meet demand. To maintain quality, he invested in new production technologies and improved logistics processes, while always focusing on product authenticity. Chobani became more than just a Greek yogurt brand. It was seen as a symbol of quality, tradition, and honesty in a saturated processed food market. Over time, Chobani not only outsold major brands, but also became a household name. Handy realized that his product was not only winning in the market, but was also revolutionizing yogurt consumption in the United States. He was pushing the industry to a new level of sustainability and authenticity, influencing even large companies to rethink their production practices. Internationalization. Chobani in the world, success in the United States, opened doors to international expansion. Handy knew his product had global appeal, and that demand for authentic foods was growing in various parts of the world. He began looking at markets outside the United States, with a particular focus on Europe, where the concept of traditional yogurt was appreciated. With the same careful approach he used to conquer the American market, Handy began adapting Chobani to local tastes and preferences without ever compromising quality or authenticity. Chobani yogurt spread to markets such as the UK, Canada, Australia, and even the Middle East. In each market, it was welcomed as an innovation, not only for its flavor, but for the story behind the product, something that made Chobani more than just a food. It was a piece of culture and an experience people wanted to experience. Continuous innovation, sustainable growth as the brand expanded and sales broke records. Handy never lost sight of the importance of constant innovation. He knew that to remain relevant in the competitive food market, Chobani needed to continue evolving. He began diversifying the product line, introducing yogurt options with different flavors, organic products, lactose-free products, and even vegan alternatives, catering to an increasingly health and environmentally conscious audience. Chobani became a brand that represented not just yogurt, but also healthy and conscious eating, aligned with the values of sustainability and respect for the consumer. The company began investing in environmentally friendly practices, such as reducing food waste, using recyclable packaging, and supporting local farmers, creating a business model that promoted sustainable growth. The consecration, a yogurt empire. Years later, Chobani had established itself as a yogurt empire, with millions of loyal customers around the world. Handy Ulukaya, once a young, penniless immigrant, was now a global example of entrepreneurial success, innovation, and social impact. He transformed a small, rundown factory into one of the world's largest food companies, always maintaining product integrity and the mission of bringing authentic food to consumers. In 2016, Handy was recognized for his philanthropy and leadership in responsible business practices. He had become not only a successful businessman, but also a champion of social and corporate responsibility, allocating a portion of Chobani's profits to helping refugees and promoting social inclusion. Legado de Handy Ulukaya, who once asked the simple question, "What if I brought real yogurt to the United States?" now answered that question resoundingly. He not only brought real yogurt, but also a new business vision based on authenticity, tradition, and sustainability. Chobani has become synonymous with quality and ethics, and Handy not only created a globally recognized brand, but also a movement that changed the food industry, inspiring other companies to rethink their processes and values. Best of all, he did this with a firm commitment to never losing sight of his roots and always putting the consumer and product quality first. Some stories seem made to inspire, and Handy Ulukaya's is one of them. From a small village in the heart of Turkey, a man who once herded sheep in the mountains became one of America's most powerful entrepreneurs. His journey, marked by resilience, passion, and a belief in the power of authenticity, not only changed his life but also transformed the way millions of Americans start their day. In his humble childhood, Handy learned from his parents the true value of hard work and dedication. His mother, with skilled hands, prepared the yogurt that would later become the foundation of a food revolution. For Handy, yogurt was not just a food, it was a symbol of his homeland, his culture, and his identity. When he arrived in the United States in search of a better life, Handy never imagined that his destiny would lead him to challenge an entire industry. He found a market saturated with artificial, sweet, and processed yogurts, and it was then that something inside him awakened. He knew he could offer something better, something genuine, something authentic. That's how Chobani was born, a brand that would represent not just a product, but a philosophy of true, unvarnished eating. He bought an old, rundown factory, and with nothing but a dream and a small amount of cash, he began transforming the yogurt market in the United States. At first, sales were modest. The thick, creamy, and natural flavor of Chobani Greek yogurt was a shock to consumers accustomed to sweeter, more artificial versions. But Handy didn't give up. He believed the key lay in the emotional connection. In the story his product told, he personally introduced Chobani in stores, explaining its origins. And gradually, people began to see the difference. What began as a personal struggle to bring real yogurt to America became a movement. Chobani wasn't just another yogurt. It was a symbol of authenticity, tradition, and respect for the consumer. Yogurt wasn't just sold, it was shared, a genuine experience that touched people's hearts. Chobani's growth was exponential. Sales soared, consumers began asking for more, and soon the brand was dominating supermarket shelves. From a humble man who dreamed of a better future, Handy Ulukaya became an icon of entrepreneurship. His story inspired millions, proving that with courage, passion, and a clear vision, an immigrant can, indeed, change the course of history. Today, Chobani is a household name, and Handy, the immigrant who arrived in the United States with nothing but a vision, became the man who forever changed the way Americans think about breakfast. By 2012, a quiet revolution had transformed the yogurt market in the United States. The Chobani name was no longer just a label on supermarket shelves, it was a symbol of quality, authenticity, and innovation. The brand that began humbly with a Turkish immigrant and an abandoned factory had become the undisputed leader in the yogurt market, a truly disruptive force in the food industry. Hamdi Ulukaya, the founder of Chobani, knew he was on a mission much bigger than simply selling yogurt. His vision was clear from the start: to bring the true, authentic taste of Greek yogurt to the American consumer. Yogurt, so familiar in its homeland, was considered exotic in the United States, and many consumers were accustomed to processed and artificial versions. Hamdi believed that authenticity could win the hearts of Americans, and in 2012, he was about to prove it resoundingly. In just 3 years, Chobani had become synonymous with Greek yogurt in the United States. Sales soared, surpassing all expectations. The secret to its success: superior quality, simple ingredients, and above all, a true story behind every yogurt. Chobani wasn't just another food product, it was a narrative of authenticity, of an immigrant who brought with him the flavor of his homeland and turned it into a global empire. Chobani's rise in the market was fueled by a perfect combination of marketing strategy, product quality, and of course, an unwavering commitment to the consumer. Hamdi Ulukaya, with his vision focused on transparency and sustainability, managed to convince millions of consumers to move away from artificial yogurts and opt for something healthier and tastier. The launch of new flavors and formats helped cement the brand as a versatile option for all tastes and lifestyles. Chobani was no longer restricted to the Greek yogurt niche. Now, the brand was present on shelves with options for everyone, including lactose-free products and even vegan alternatives, serving a broader and more diverse consumer base. With its increased sales, Chobani not only challenged market giants, but also set new standards for quality and ethics in the food industry. The company focused on sustainable practices, such as using recyclable packaging, and committed to improving the lives of the farming communities that supplied the ingredients for its products. This only increased consumer loyalty to the brand, which began to see it not only as a healthy option, but also as an ethical and responsible brand. By 2012, Chobani was not only dominating the market, but also shaping the future of yogurt in the United States. More than that, it was proving that by maintaining authenticity, quality, and passion for what you believe in, you can create a market revolution and build an empire. Hamdi Ulukaya, with his vision and dedication, transformed Chobani from a simple idea into a globally recognized brand, and by 2012, he had achieved the impossible. The future looked even brighter, and what he didn't know at the time was that this would be just the beginning of a journey that would bring many more surprises for him, the yogurt market, and millions of consumers around the world. By the time Hamdi Ulukaya reached billionaire status, he had already transformed the yogurt market in the United States and beyond. Chobani's meteoric rise put him at the top of the list of the world's richest people. But unlike many billionaires who pursue a life of luxury and ostentation, Hamdi maintained what has always characterized him: a simple lifestyle focused on his principles. Even with the immense wealth he amassed, Hamdi never abandoned his humble origins. Growing up in a remote village in Turkey, where life was hard but filled with love and family unity, Hamdi always believed that his true wealth lay in the things that couldn't be bought: honor, tradition, and authenticity. In his personal life, Hamdi never strayed from those roots. He continued to live in a simple and discreet environment, far from the ostentatious grand mansions and expensive luxuries many associate with billionaires. Instead, Hamdi preferred a more private life, where the values of family, hard work, and humility remained a priority. The attention he gave to his employees and his community, for example, was more valuable than any material possession. In his home, instead of grand pieces of art or luxurious furniture, Hamdi preferred to surround himself with simple objects with great sentimental value. He maintained a strong connection with his parents, his children, and his heritage, always keeping in mind the legacy he wanted to leave not only for his family, but for the world. He firmly believed that his true mission was to make a difference in people's lives, whether with the product he created or through his philanthropy. The world of business and its philosophy of life. Although he was a billionaire, and constantly in meetings with the world's biggest investors and business leaders. Hamdi never let himself be seduced by the culture of excess. Instead of spending his fortune on major events or luxury goods, he prioritized investments in social initiatives and the improvement of his company, always with an eye on the positive impact he could have on people's lives. He became an advocate for social responsibility and used part of his wealth to fund inclusion projects, support refugees, and promote education. Hamdi, once an immigrant himself seeking a better life, never forgot where he came from. Helping others achieve their own opportunities and dreams was, for him, a more rewarding way to spend his money than any material thing. Chobani, an empire with a purpose. With Chobani, Hamdi created an empire, but he never lost focus on what truly mattered to him, the product. He always maintained that yogurt was a reflection of his hard work, his family's tradition, and his respect for the consumer. Even as Chobani expanded globally and became one of the largest yogurt companies in the world, Hamdi remained heavily involved in the company's operations, making decisions that ensured product quality and commitment to values remained unmatched. Unlike other billionaires who distanced themselves from their companies as their fortunes grow, Hamdi remained a presence at Chobani, not only as a leader, but also as an example of business ethics. He was, and still is, the face of the company, and his leadership style reflected his beliefs in being accessible, working with integrity, and maintaining a transparent corporate culture. A simple life with a profound impact. Hamdi Ulukay's simplicity of life extends beyond his personal lifestyle. It is also reflected in his leadership style. He didn't surround himself with a luxurious bodyguard or high-profile events. Instead, he was always accessible, with a clear vision that his company's success lay not only in profit, but in generating a positive impact on people's lives. He was one of the first great entrepreneurs to truly place human values at the center of corporate strategy. Hamdi never forgot where he started. The immigrant who arrived in the United States with little more than a dream was now a billionaire. But deep down, he was still the same man who worked with his family to create the best yogurt possible. He knew his true wealth lay not in a bank, but in the satisfaction of seeing people around the world connect with the authenticity and flavor of Chobani, and in the legacy he would leave in terms of social change. In 2012, when he became a billionaire, many saw him as a figure of entrepreneurial success. But for Hamdi Ulukaya, success was never about material wealth. He always focused on creating a meaningful product and maintaining a simple life, never losing sight of his mission to improve the world around him. He remained true to his principles, and his story remains a testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest empires can be built, not by the relentless pursuit of more money or power, but by a passion for something authentic and the courage to transform people's lives. Hamdi Ulukaya, the founder of Chobani, never forgot his own roots. As an immigrant to America, he knew deeply the difficulties many face when trying to start over in a new country. Through his story, Hamdi understood that, for many, the path to success isn't just about finding an opportunity, but also about having the right support and tools to overcome barriers such as language, employment, and cultural adaptation. With this knowledge and empathy, Hamdi Ulukaya created support programs for refugees and immigrants, aiming to provide them not only with a chance at a new life, but also with the opportunity to thrive and contribute meaningfully to society. The beginning of a social mission soon after Chobani's enormous success, Hamdi dedicated himself to creating programs that would help other immigrants and refugees find a solid foothold in their new country, just as he had the opportunity to do. His commitment was an extension of Chobani's own mission: authenticity, inclusion, and building a united community. In 2015, Hamdi launched the Chobani Refugee Initiative, a program designed to help refugees and immigrants integrate into the U.S. workforce. The mission was not only to provide these individuals with employment, but also to help them develop professionally and emotionally, ensuring they had a real opportunity to thrive in their new lives. Employment and training programs. The first step of the Chobani Refugee Initiative was to secure jobs within the company itself. Hamdi made a point of creating direct opportunities for refugees and immigrants in production areas, but also in administration, marketing, and finance. He knew that providing jobs wasn't enough. People needed ongoing training. So he began creating training and professional development programs so that workers could grow within the company. The programs were designed to ensure that everyone, regardless of their level of education or prior experience, could learn and thrive. Chobani provided English classes, digital literacy courses, and specific training for roles within the food industry. The goal was to empower refugees and immigrants so they had the skills necessary to occupy leadership positions, not only within Chobani, but anywhere. Hamdi always said, giving a job isn't enough. We need to empower these individuals to write their own success story. Mentoring and psychological counseling. Beyond employment opportunities, Hamdi knew that many refugees and immigrants had endured traumatic experiences and often felt isolated and disconnected from their new communities. Therefore, Chobani's programs also included personalized mentoring and psychological support. He believed that emotional and mental well-being were crucial to successful integration. Hamdi launched free mentoring and psychological counseling for all immigrant employees. This included support groups for those dealing with issues related to loss, trauma, or the pain of cultural adaptation. The mentors were comprised of veteran Chobani employees as well as qualified external professionals, aiming to guide refugees through their adaptation process and help them feel more connected to their new society. Partnerships with refugee organizations. With the experience gained from the success of his internal programs, Hamdi began expanding his vision beyond Chobani's walls. He partnered with several refugee organizations and NGOs, including the ACLU and the International Rescue Committee (IRC), to expand the reach and impact of his refugee integration programs. These partnerships helped Chobani fund educational initiatives, such as language schools and cultural adaptation programs, as well as provide workshops on civil rights and responsibilities to help immigrants integrate more effectively into their communities. It also fostered long-term partnerships with these organizations to support housing, education, and healthcare initiatives for refugees. Fostering entrepreneurship for immigrants, Hamdi's vision for refugees and immigrants went beyond simple inclusion in the job market. He also wanted to ensure that these individuals had the opportunity to start their own businesses, if they so desired. Hamdi created the Chobani Refugee Entrepreneurship Fund, which provided microloans, financial advice, and business management training to immigrants aspiring to become entrepreneurs. This fund helped dozens of immigrants and refugees establish their own businesses, many of which were linked to the food industry. Hamdi believed that innovation and entrepreneurship were key to strengthening the economy, especially when immigrants bring with them a diversity of perspectives and cultural experiences that enrich society. Lasting impact, social transformation. The programs Hamdi created not only provided employment and development opportunities for thousands of refugees and immigrants, but also had a profound impact on the communities they served. Many of the refugees who started with simple jobs at Chobani have risen through the company's ranks and now hold leadership positions, becoming sources of inspiration for other immigrants. Hamdi's initiative also had a positive impact on other companies, which began adopting similar programs to integrate refugees and immigrants into their operations. In doing so, Hamdi not only changed the lives of thousands of individuals, but also demonstrated to the corporate world the importance of supporting and investing in diverse talent, those often seen as invisible. Hamdi never hid his belief that, by providing a safe space and real opportunities for refugees and immigrants, he was contributing to building a stronger, more united country, where diversity was celebrated as an asset, not a liability. He transformed Chobani into an example of how social and corporate inclusion can be not only a moral responsibility, but also a driver of growth and innovation. O legado de Hamdi Ulukaya today, refugee and immigrant support programs remain one of Hamdi Ulukaya's most significant legacies over the years. His vision for a more inclusive and just world has inspired many other business leaders to follow suit. he proved that by helping others thrive, he was also contributing to the well-being and growth of society as a whole. Looking back, Handy is proud not only of the yogurt empire he built, but also of the impact he made on the lives of so many people who came to the United States, seeking a second chance. For him, giving refugees and immigrants this opportunity was not only an act of kindness, but an investment in the future of a country that has always believed itself to be the land of opportunity. Throughout his journey, Handy Ulukaya has always made it clear that his success was not driven by the relentless pursuit of wealth. What drove him from the beginning was something much deeper and more powerful: dignity. As a child, growing up in a small village in Turkey, Handy learned from his parents that the true value of life lies not in material possessions, but in the way one lives, in hard work, and above all, in the honor and respectability of one's actions. For Handy, the concept of dignity is intrinsically linked to respect for one's roots, culture, and others. Money, he knew, could come with time, but unless it was built on a solid foundation of values and purpose, it would never have meaning. When he founded Chobani, Handy wasn't just creating a successful company. He was creating a movement, a space where workers, especially immigrants and refugees, could find not only employment, but also respect and opportunities to develop, grow, and achieve their own sense of dignity. For him, dignity lay in giving people the chance to improve their lives and feel like they belong to something bigger than just a production machine. With each batch of yogurt he produced, Handy didn't just think about the profit he could generate. He thought about the impact his brand would have on the people who consumed it and the lives of those who contributed to its success. He knew his true legacy wouldn't be measured by the numbers in his bank account, but by the lives transformed. He wanted the immigrants who worked at Chobani to see their work as more than just a means of support. He wanted them to feel proud of their work, and that, by being part of something genuine and authentic, they were contributing to a more just and inclusive society. Handy often repeated that money doesn't bring dignity, knowing that a person's power lies not in how much they possessed, but in how they were treated, the autonomy they had over their lives, and the opportunities they had for self-development. And that's what Handy wanted to provide. More than jobs, more than a successful product, he wanted to give people a sense of belonging and the certainty that they were valued. For Handy, creating programs for refugees and immigrants was a reflection of this philosophy. He knew that many of these workers faced immense challenges. For many, simply having a job, a home, and a means of supporting themselves in their new country was a dream come true. But Handy wanted more. He wanted to give them what money alone could not: dignity. He wanted immigrants and refugees to have the chance to grow, to learn, to become leaders, to have their voices heard, and to feel like they were contributing in a real and meaningful way. The phrase "this was never about money, it was about dignity" is a powerful reminder that life's greatest achievements are not measured solely in numbers or material wealth, but in profound human values such as respect, compassion, and opportunity. Handy Ulukaya was always dedicated to proving that by keeping these values at the core of his work, he could not only create a successful company, but also shape a more just and dignified society, where true success lies not only in becoming rich, but in elevating those around him. He knew that true dignity is not achieved through the power of money, but through the power of genuine action and commitment to others. Ultimately, Handy taught us that the true value of life lies in how we treat one another, in how we give others the opportunity to rise up and achieve what they perhaps don't even believe is possible. And that, yes, is what truly brings dignity, a legacy that lasts far longer than any material fortune. Handy Ulukaya's journey wasn't limited to building a yogurt empire. It also became an example of how businesses can play a significant role in social inclusion and supporting refugees and immigrants, a group that often faces immense challenges finding a new life in a new country. Throughout his journey, Handy realized that his social responsibility could not be ignored, and he used his success to create support programs that helped these individuals fully integrate into society and thrive. The creation of these programs was one of Handy's ways of giving back to society what society had given him. while also building a legacy of solidarity and empathy. He believed that a country's true growth lies in the hands of everyone, and that immigrants, especially refugees, possess a wealth of experiences and skills that could positively transform society. The Chobani Refugee Initiative, Inclusion Through Employment, Hamdi's first major initiative to support refugees and immigrants, was to create employment opportunities within Chobani itself. The idea was not only to provide jobs, but also to open doors to true social and professional integration. In 2015, Hamdi announced the Chobani Refugee Initiative, a program focused on hiring refugees and immigrants to work in various areas of the company, from production to administrative roles. By doing so, he not only helped alleviate the financial hardships of refugees arriving in the United States, but also gave them the chance to rebuild their lives with dignity. Hamdi understood that simply providing a job wasn't enough, so he went further and implemented training, continuing education, and mentoring programs to ensure these workers had real opportunities for growth. He knew that by offering ongoing education within his company, he could transform these people into future leaders, ensuring that their lives not only improved, but also made an impact on the communities in which they lived. Professional training and skills development. Chobani became a learning and training space for refugees and immigrants. Hamdi knew that knowledge and skills were crucial for these workers to not only find work, but also thrive in a more competitive economy. Thus, in partnership with local educational organizations, Chobani launched digital literacy programs, English courses, and technical training in areas such as food production, business management, and leadership. These courses were designed to meet the different skill levels and needs of each worker. They not only taught the skills needed for work within Chobani, but also provided skills that could be applied elsewhere. Additionally, Hamdi introduced personal mentoring for each immigrant or refugee who joined the company. Experienced Chobani mentors became guides for these new employees, not only helping them with their daily tasks, but also guiding them through cultural adaptation and the social integration process, psychological support, and emotional well-being. Another important aspect of the Chobani Refugee Initiative was psychological support. Hamdi knew that many refugees faced profound trauma due to violence, loss, and forced displacement. Mental health was a fundamental part of adapting to a new country, and Hamdi wanted to ensure his collaborators felt welcomed and understood as they rebuild their lives. So he offered free counseling services and support groups for those dealing with the effects of trauma. Chobani became a space not only for work, but also for healing and acceptance, where refugees and immigrants could safely express their emotions and challenges as they worked to rebuild their lives and establish a new identity in the United States. Entrepreneurship and microcredit programs. Hamdi also believed that entrepreneurship was one of the best ways to ensure that immigrants and refugees not only found work, but also created their own opportunities. He wanted these individuals to have the chance to start their own businesses and thrive, as he did by founding Chobani. In 2017, he founded the Chobani Refugee and Immigrant Entrepreneurship Fund, which provided microloans and free consulting to immigrants and refugees who wanted to start their own businesses. The fund aimed to support small business ventures in a variety of fields, such as gastronomy, crafts, and services. Hamdi knew that by enabling these entrepreneurs to pursue their dreams independently, he was creating not only economic opportunities, but also a network of innovation and diversity that could benefit society as a whole. Partnerships with refugee organizations. Hamdi also went beyond his own company and sought to partner with refugee support organizations, such as the ACLU and the International Rescue Committee (IRC), to strengthen his initiatives and expand his impact. Through these partnerships, he supported educational, social rehabilitation, and economic integration programs for refugees not directly connected to Chobani. These strategic partnerships have enabled Chobani to become a model of corporate social responsibility, not only helping to create jobs, but also truly transforming the lives of refugees and immigrants across the United States. Lasting impact and vision for the future. The impact of Hamdi Ulukay's programs has been profound. By providing opportunities for refugees and immigrants, he has not only changed their lives, but also helped create a more diverse and inclusive society. Many of the refugees who started with simple jobs at Chobani have risen through the company's ranks and now hold leadership positions. Others, with the support of the Entrepreneurship Fund, have established their own successful businesses, contributing their skills and talents to local economies. Hamdi always said that the greatest legacy of his life would be not only the success of Chobani, but also the transformation of the lives of those who were often invisible to society. His vision wasn't limited to creating a yogurt empire, but to creating opportunities for all. He believed that by giving refugees and immigrants dignity, opportunity, and respect, he was truly changing the fabric of American society. Today, the programs Hamdi created for refugees and immigrants continue to positively impact thousands of people, and his corporate social responsibility model continues to inspire other companies to follow his example. Chobani, which began as a small yogurt factory, has become not only a successful company, but also a symbol of solidarity, inclusion, and empowerment. Hamdi Ulukaya has proven that with courage and commitment, it is possible not only to build a financial empire, but also a legacy of social transformation that truly makes a difference in people's lives. Over the years, many stories of personal and professional transformation have intertwined with Chobani's growth. The impact the company has had on the lives of refugees, immigrants, and people who previously found themselves in difficult situations is one of Hamdi Ulukaya's greatest legacies. What began as a small employment initiative for those most in need has become a movement for change that not only created jobs, but also opportunities for growth, development, and personal fulfillment. Here are some of the stories that exemplify Chobani's transformative power in the lives of its employees. 1. Ahmed's story. From Syrian refugee to leader at Chobani, Ahmed arrived in the United States in 2013, fleeing the civil war in Syria. As a refugee, he found himself in an unfamiliar country, speaking no English and with few skills for the American job market. His first few months were difficult. Adapting to the new culture was arduous, and the struggle to find a job was even more challenging. When he learned about the Chobani Refugee Initiative, Ahmed decided to give it a try, even though he wasn't sure what to expect. He started as a factory production line worker, a humble position, but a vital opportunity to begin rebuilding his life. What started as a simple job soon turned into something much bigger. Hamdi Ulukaya and the Chobani culture invested in Ahmed and other workers, offering training programs, English language education, and mentoring. Over time, Ahmed improved his English, learned new food industry skills, and stood out for his dedication and work ethic. He was promoted and soon became a production supervisor. Today, Ahmed not only has a stable job, but he's also a role model for other immigrants and refugees arriving in the United States, seeking a new life. Chobani didn't just give me a job, it gave me dignity and the chance to be something more. Today, I'm proud of what I do, and I know I can grow even more, says Ahmed, now 31. 2. Maria's story. A single mom who found opportunity at Chobani. Maria, a single mother, arrived in the United States with her 6-year-old daughter. Coming from a village in Mexico, she struggled to find a job stable enough to support them. With basic English and no college degree, Maria felt stagnant and without real opportunities. When she was hired by Chobani in 2014 as a packaging line worker, she never imagined it would change her life. But that's exactly what happened. Chobani offered Maria more than just a job. She was given the opportunity to participate in an operations management training program where she learned about logistics, inventory management, and manufacturing processes. With the support of her supervisors and co-workers, Maria honed her skills and soon began leading a small team within the factory. She rose to become a team supervisor and was promoted to operations manager. Maria is extremely grateful for the opportunity for growth that Chobani gave her. When I joined Chobani, I didn't even know where to begin, but what I've learned here goes far beyond work. They gave me confidence, education, and above all, the support I needed to move forward and ensure a better future for my daughter, Maria says with a smile. She now works in employee training and development, helping other women and immigrants achieve the same opportunities she had. Maria's story is a testament to the power of education and support, and how they can transform a life of despair into one of hope and success. 3. Farid's story. From the field to the factory and beyond. Farid, originally from Afghanistan, arrived in the United States in 2015 after spending years in a refugee camp in Jordan. He never had the chance to attend school and, for many years, lived in precarious conditions, dealing with scarce resources and constant uncertainty about the future. When Farid was hired by Chobani as a yogurt packaging worker, he had the opportunity to learn not only a trade but also the English language. His dedication and eagerness to learn quickly became apparent. He made a point of studying at night when he wasn't working, and his supervisors quickly noticed his skill and commitment. After a few years, Farid was promoted to team leader and later to shift manager. His success at Chobani was a combination of hard work and taking advantage of the professional development opportunities the company offered. Today, Farid not only holds a leadership position, but also serves on the refugee and immigrant recruitment and integration team at Chobani. He's proud to be able to help other immigrants find their place in the company, just as he did years ago. My life was very different before coming to Chobani. Today, I have a stable job. I can support my family, and most importantly, I know I'm making a difference. I'm not just selling yogurt, I'm helping build a new life for other people, says Farid, emotion evident on his face. For Amina's story, women's empowerment and leadership. Amina came from Sudan in 2014, seeking a better future after years of conflict in her homeland. Upon arriving in the United States, she found herself in a new country, struggling to adapt to the language and the job market. Working as a domestic worker wasn't what she envisioned for her life. When she joined Chobani, Amina found a welcoming and inclusive work environment where she was seen not just as a worker, but as a person with potential. Chobani offered Amina mentorship and professional coaching, as well as resources to learn English and other communication and management skills. Over time, Amina was promoted to quality supervisor, a position where she developed her leadership and process management skills. She also became a role model for other women who, like her, had started their careers in simple jobs but found opportunities for advancement within Chobani. Amina now leads a production team and works closely with the diversity and inclusion department to ensure that immigrant women have the same opportunities as any other employee. She is proud of her progress and the impact she can make on other women's lives. Chobani gave me what I never thought possible: confidence, education, and the chance to lead. Now, I help other women believe in their potential, just as someone once believed in me. Amina shares with a smile of accomplishment the impact of Hamdi Ulukaya on Chobani. These stories of transformation aren't just about Chobani being a good company. They're proof that true social change comes when you give people more than just jobs. Hamdi Ulukaya created a company that not only provides job opportunities, but also empowers people to find their purpose and reach their full potential. Chobani is not just a yogurt company. It is a platform for transformation where immigrants and refugees find dignity, respect, and the chance to thrive. The hard work and opportunities offered by the company ensure that everyone, regardless of their background, can overcome challenges and build a better future for themselves and their families. By offering education, emotional support, and opportunities for growth, Chobani has become a major source of inspiration for immigrants and refugees, demonstrating that a new life can be built through effort, dedication, and a belief in the infinite possibilities of each individual. One September morning in 2016, Hamdi Ulukaya, the founder of Chobani, made an announcement that would forever mark the history of the company and its relationship with its employees. At a meeting with all Chobani employees, he revealed something that left everyone speechless. Hamdi decided to donate 10% of Chobani to his employees. The gesture not only reflected his leadership philosophy, but also a deep belief that a company's success is measured not only by profits or growth, but by solidarity and social justice within it. The context of the ad, Chobani had become a yogurt empire, dominating the market and transforming the food industry in the United States. In its decade of existence, the brand grew from a small factory purchased by Hamdi in 2005 to one of the most successful and innovative food companies in the world. But for Hamdi, success wasn't just a matter of numbers. He believed that as the company grew, it was crucial to share that growth with the people who helped build it. Chobani's employees were, for him, the true reason for the company's success. Since Chobani's early days, Hamdi has prioritized the well-being of his employees, offering training programs, development, and even extra benefits like healthcare and wellness programs. However, the 2016 announcement was revolutionary. He didn't just want to offer temporary benefits or competitive salaries. Hamdi wanted to give his employees a real share of the success they helped build. The surprise and the impact at the meeting, where Hamdi made the announcement, Chobani employees gathered in a large room, unsure of what to expect. When Hamdi took the stage, everyone was on edge. He smiled at the audience, looked at the familiar faces of his employees, and with characteristic humility, began to speak. "I've always believed that this success isn't mine, it's ours. Each of you was a part of it. Without you, we wouldn't have gotten this far," he said in a calm and sincere tone. He then revealed the historic decision. "In recognition of everyone's hard work and dedication, I've decided to donate 10% of Chobani to you, the company's employees. This is my gift to ensure that everyone who has contributed to Chobani shares in our success." The room fell silent for a moment, and then a wave of applause and tears filled the room. Many employees were visibly moved by Hamdi's gesture, a gesture that made them feel not just part of Chobani, but like owners of an important piece of its history. The financial value of this donation was estimated in the billions of dollars, meaning that employees, who were primarily immigrants, refugees, and workers previously invisible to many traditional companies, would now have a real stake in Chobani's success. This change not only meant financial security for many, but also transformed the company's culture, reinforcing the idea that, in a truly successful company, everyone should have a share of the rewards. Hamdi's philosophy, purpose beyond money. The 10% donation wasn't a decision based on financial gain or a desire for public recognition. Hamdi always believed that the true measure of a company's success isn't its market value or revenue growth, but how it treats the people who make it possible. He wanted Chobani to be a model for companies that measure their importance not just by money, but by the impact they make on people's lives. "I want everyone at Chobani to feel like they have a part in our story," Hamdi said in an interview after the announcement. "When you own a piece of something, you don't just work for it, you live for it, and it changes how you view your work and the work of everyone around you." He continued, "This isn't just a gift for today's employees. It's a gift for those who come after us, for those who will be part of our journey. Everyone is an essential part of Chobani." The legacy and the repercussion. Hamdi's announcement was widely celebrated as one of the most selfless and meaningful gestures ever made by a businessman in the modern world. It was widely covered by the media, with many praising Hamdi's openness and generosity in deciding to distribute part of his company's value to those who contributed to its success. In a world where large corporations often concentrate wealth in the hands of a few shareholders and executives, Hamdi's actions stood out as a demonstration of compassionate leadership. This act sparked a wave of discussion about the role of companies in redistributing wealth and valuing their employees, especially those often overlooked by the traditional capitalist system. Furthermore, the gesture had a profound impact within Chobani, creating a sense of unity and purpose among employees. Many employees, who already felt a strong sense of loyalty to the company due to Hamdi's treatment of them, now felt even more connected to Chobani's mission. They knew that, in a sense, they were co-owners of this story, which, for many, further increased their motivation and dedication. The effects were also felt outside of Chobani. As other companies began to look at this business model, many began considering ways to give employees greater financial participation, as a way to not only improve productivity and satisfaction, but also to create a more equitable and inclusive company culture. The personal impact, Hamdi's true legacy for Hamdi Ulukaya. This 10% donation wasn't just about sharing the wealth. It was the fulfillment of his vision that business should be about people, and that, ultimately, a company's value lies not in how much money it generates, but in the positive impact it has on the lives of those who make it possible. He believed that by sharing Chobani's success with his employees, he was creating a legacy of dignity, solidarity, and respect, a model that could inspire other companies to rethink their approach to profit and social responsibility. When people own a piece of what they create, they feel responsible, connected, and proud. Hamdi reflected, speaking about the donation, "That's the kind of culture we want at Chobani, a culture of family, where everyone has a part in our victory." This action transformed Hamdi Ulukaya into a symbol of generous leadership, an example that the true power of an entrepreneur lies not only in the control of the company, but in the ability to build a strong and united community where everyone has the chance to thrive and be recognized for their contributions. Ultimately, Chobani's 10% donation was an act that redefined what it means to be successful in business. And for Hamdi Ulukaya, it was yet another way to ensure his company wasn't just a giant in the market, but a life-changing company that, above all, believed that true success is shared by all. For Hamdi Ulukaya, this 10% donation wasn't just about sharing the wealth. It was the fulfillment of his vision that business should be about people, and that, ultimately, a company's value lies not in how much money it generates, but in the positive impact it has on the lives of those who make it possible. He believed that by sharing Chobani's success with his employees, he was creating a legacy of dignity, solidarity, and respect, a model that could inspire other companies to rethink their approach to profit and social responsibility. When people own a piece of what they create, they feel responsible, connected, and proud. Hamdi reflected, speaking about the donation, "That's the kind of culture we want at Chobani, a culture of family, where everyone has a part in our victory." This action transformed Hamdi Ulukaya into a symbol of generous leadership, an example that the true power of an entrepreneur lies not only in the control of the company, but in the ability to build a strong and united community where everyone has the chance to thrive and be recognized for their contributions. Ultimately, Chobani's 10% donation was an act that redefined what it means to be successful in business. And for Hamdi Ulukaya, it was yet another way to ensure his company wasn't just a giant in the market, but a life-changing company that, above all, believed that true success is shared by all. Just in case, now I tell the end of the story here by Chak, the end of the story. The legacy of Hamdi Ulukaya. Hamdi Ulukaya's journey, which began as a simple immigrant with a dream and a small yogurt factory, became one of the greatest examples of success and humanity in the business world. But looking back, Hamdi knew that the true value of his story wasn't the billions he had made with Chobani. His greatest legacy lay not in the product or the profits, but in the lives he transformed and the opportunities he created for those who, like him, had come to America seeking a second chance. In his last major interview, Hamdi reflected on his journey. "I didn't do this to be famous," he said. "I did it because I knew that if I succeeded, I could help change people's lives deep down. What I really wanted was to show that even from a small place, like a village in the middle of Turkey, you can reach the world, but not alone. You need the people around you, and when you put them first, you can build something real." He was no longer just the founder of a giant yogurt company. Hamdi became an advocate for a humane business model, one in which dignity and respect for employees were as important as profits. Chobani's 10% donation to its employees, the creation of programs for refugees and immigrants, and the support of thousands of people over the years were a true reflection of his mission, a world where everyone has a chance to thrive. Over time, Hamdi stepped away from the big cameras and the pressures of business, focusing on continuing the work he believed in. He made a point of supporting other companies and foundations that followed his philosophy of social responsibility and inclusion, using his platform to encourage more entrepreneurs to consider the social impact of their actions. In a gesture that deeply touched those who followed him closely, Hamdi announced that, throughout his life, he would not leave a financial inheritance to his children. Instead, he asked them to continue the work he began of bringing opportunity and dignity to those who needed it most, and of creating a world where people are valued for who they are, not what they have. His true legacy, he knew, would be the stories of life transformation, the opportunities created, and the communities united by honest work and compassion. Hamdi Ulukay's impact, however, wasn't limited to Chobani or the United States. The model he created, embracing diversity and investing in each individual's potential, spread worldwide. Entrepreneurs on every continent began adopting his ideas, demonstrating that true greatness doesn't come from getting rich alone, but from sharing success and helping others grow. And so, Hamdi Ulukay's story doesn't end with his retirement or any other public event. His legacy lives on in every Chobani employee, in every refugee who found a new opportunity, in every immigrant who found dignity in their work. The impact of his vision extends beyond Chobani, touching hearts around the world and showing, by example, that one man's success can truly be everyone's success. Hamdi wasn't just a billionaire. He was, and always will be, a symbol of humanity, solidarity, and a vision for a more just world where everyone has a chance to rise up, thrive, and be part of a story bigger than any of us could imagine alone. His name, Hamdi Ulukaya, will be remembered not for his wealth, but for the impact he had on the lives of those who needed it most, and for his example that true wealth lies in how you treat others, and the legacy you leave to the world. After stepping away from the front lines at Chobani, Hamdi Ulukaya continued his leadership trajectory, but now in a more strategic role focused on his social mission. He continued to work on social inclusion and philanthropic projects, as well as dedicating his time to human rights causes and supporting refugees and immigrants, groups with which he had always had a deep connection. Although his name was now recognized globally, he refused to be remembered solely for the financial success of his company. For him, true value lay in the lives touched by the opportunities he helped create. Expanding your mission, global partnerships. Hamdi felt his mission was far from accomplished. He knew the world still needed more. For him, solidarity and collaboration should not be limited to the United States alone, but should become a global philosophy. He then began expanding his refugee and immigrant support initiatives, partnering with governments and international organizations to establish training and integration programs for refugees around the world. He worked directly with organizations like the UNHCR, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, and the Red Cross to promote more education and employment programs in refugee camps and immigrant communities, bringing more resources and visibility to these causes. Hamdi used his network and global influence to gain the support of other large corporations, encouraging them to adopt social inclusion models similar to the one he had implemented at Chobani. His experience with Chobani served as a model for many other companies, especially when it came to embracing diversity in the workplace and employing people who had traditionally been overlooked. Companies began to understand that true value lay in people, not just the products they sold. This approach had a ripple effect, becoming a philosophy increasingly adopted by corporations worldwide. The Hamdi Ulukaya Foundation, continuing the transformation in 2018. Hamdi founded the Hamdi Ulukaya Foundation to expand his social impact and ensure his initiatives continued to grow. The foundation focused on empowering marginalized communities, particularly refugees, immigrants, and minorities, by providing financing for small businesses and educational and training opportunities. The foundation also focused on promoting human dignity and helping individuals rebuild after extreme situations like war and forced displacement. Hamdi wanted to ensure that everyone, regardless of their background, could reach their potential. The foundation partnered with universities, refugee support organizations, employment agencies, and government agencies, creating an ecosystem of support for those most in need of a second chance. The foundation also launched international campaigns to raise awareness of humanitarian crises and promote policy changes that favor the integration and dignity of refugees and immigrants, working alongside other activists and global leaders. Impact on corporate culture. Hamdi's greatest legacy was not only in the way he treated his employees, but also in how he influenced global corporate culture. His example of compassionate leadership resonated with the practices of many companies, causing other business leaders to rethink the role of corporations in society. More companies began adopting inclusion and diversity policies, creating microcredit funds for immigrants and refugees, and offering career development programs for workers from diverse backgrounds. Furthermore, Hamdi was a pioneer in speaking openly about the need for wealth redistribution within companies, especially when it came to employee stock and profit sharing. He was also one of the first businessmen to champion sustainable corporate rate policies, not only in environmental terms, but also in social terms. Under his leadership, Chobani adopted practices of transparency and accountability, placing ethics at the core of its operations. This was a key factor in the company's continued growth, making it a global benchmark for purpose-driven businesses. Returned to his homeland, the full circle. In 2022, Hamdi decided to return to his hometown in Turkey, where it all began. But his return wasn't a farewell to the world of business or philanthropy. It was a way to close the loop and thank his roots. He made a point of investing in sustainability and education initiatives in his local community, creating schools and training programs for local youth to ensure more people had access to the opportunities he had throughout his life. The village where Hamdi grew up was now a place he helped transform, not only through his financial investment, but also by bringing his knowledge and experience to help develop the region. He always believed that a person's true prosperity came not from their personal wealth, but from their ability to give back and help uplift those around them. O legado eterno di Hamdi Ulukaya. Ultimately, Hamdi Ulukaya's story isn't about the yogurt empire he built or the billions he amassed. His legacy is much greater. He changed the lives of thousands of refugees, immigrants, and workers from diverse backgrounds. He proved that it is possible to succeed in the business world without losing sight of humanity, solidarity, and dignity. Hamdi never sought to be remembered as a man of wealth. He wanted to be remembered as someone who used his influence to do good, someone who believed in the power of teamwork and the importance of lifting each other up. His impact extends beyond the walls of Chobani, touching the lives of people around the world who now have the chance to thrive and find dignity in their journeys. Hamdi Ulukaya's name will be remembered by many, not only for his entrepreneurial skills, but for his ability to transform lives and show the world that by investing in people, success is collective and the legacy external.